to have the mission and vision of the school district read, please?
Richmond Community Schools guide students on pathways of learning to a future of limitless possibilities.
And the vision?
Richmond Community Schools, a community nurturing mind, body, and spirit to prepare students for life of choice, purpose, and service. I gotta get that together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First, opportunity for public commentary. There's no one, seeing no one signed up, thank you very much. We can go on to the consent items.
For your consideration this evening, in our consent items, we have 3.01, the approval of minutes, 3.02, human resources, 3.03, the update to the student laptop fee schedule, 3.04, accounts payable, and 3.05, our monthly financial report.
Do I have a motion to, oh, and we do have an addendum to the HR,
Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that.
which is at your places and was posted online.
I move for approval of the consent items with the addendum as presented.
Do I have a second?
I second it.
Second by Dixie. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? To the action items.
Okay, our first action item this evening, I'm going to ask Mrs. Scalf to speak to, and that is our donations.
Good evening. Tonight we have a number of donations that total $6,477.59. And I will read through those very quickly. We do want to thank our public for their generosity as they contribute to all of the activities you'll see tonight. Hills Pet Nutrition Caring Hearts Program donated to Vale Elementary. Tracy Amix donated to the Automotive Technology Program at RHS. We had an anonymous donation for Freedom Rider teacher training at RHS. Joe Etherington donated to the athletic department at RHS. Wetzel Honda donated to the RHS track program. Mr. and Mrs. Philip Dickman donated to the boys golf team at RHS. Dr. and Mrs. Timothy Hirons also donated to the boys golf team. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Love, Mr. James Holyfield, Mr. and Mrs. Gary Clear, Mr. and Mrs. Timothy Schultz, Stevens Wire Products, Mr. Lawrence Blanford, Dr. and Mrs. Bradford Barrett, Mr. Richard Pugh, Mr. and Mrs. Jeffrey Jackson, Mr. Jack Hatcher, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Holthouse, Mr. and Mrs. James Duke, Mr. and Mrs. Justin Scheiben, Mr. and Mrs. Timothy Miller, Freeman Planning and Design, Inc., Mr. and Mrs. Robert Warfel, Dick Hill and Son Heating and Air Conditioning, Inc., Brown Appraisal Services, Lingle Family Charitable Giving, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Jenkins, all donated to the RHS Boys Golf Team. Primex Plastics Corporation donated to the RHS Boys Baseball Team. John and Kim Weber donated in memory of James Stevens to the RHS Athletic Program. Sherry Robertson donated to the RHS Athletic Program in memory of Robert Ray. Vicki Johnson, Carl and Marjorie Sharp Endowment Fund, Wayne County Foundation, all donated to the Proudly Presenting series at Civic Hall. Tonight, we are thankful for each of these donations, and I ask that the board approve donations in the amount of $6,477.59.
All right, do I have a motion?
I move for approval of the donations.
All right, second? Second by Jeff. Any comments or questions on that, other than thank you so very much?
I would like to thank John Weber and his wife and family for the donation that they gave to honor and support my father's passing. Those of you who may not know, my father passed away January 20th this year, and my father had been a great supporter of Richmond Community Schools, not just when I was in, excuse me, when I was here, or my siblings, but all throughout. And when the Webers made that donation and told me that they wanted to, I was totally humbled by that. But I hope and pray that even that amount will go to help some young person understand the worth of the value of athletics, extracurricular and the total value of education at Richmond Community Schools. So I wanted to say on behalf of my family, John, and to your family, thank you very much.
Very good. Anything else? All those in favor of accepting the donations as presented signify by saying aye. Aye. Hearing none opposed, we'll go on to the next policy updates.
So our next action item is policy 3430 update. And I'm going to ask Mrs. O'Brien if she would speak to just some of the basic changes to this policy.
Thank you. This is a working document. When we updated board policy, this was a policy that we updated, but again, it's a working document, so we've noticed just in using the policy that there were a couple things that maybe were an oversight the first time we updated and that we missed. In the first paragraph, it mentions professional staff, but this policy really applies to any eligible employee. So we wanted to clarify that language as well. Also in the first paragraph on page 2, it makes reference to the superintendent in terms of medical documentation. That's usually turned into the Office of Human Resources, not to the superintendent. So that was just a change as well. And then there was an addition to the first paragraph after letter E. It makes reference to the master contract, but we also have benefit packages and the classified contractual employee benefit handbook that would be referenced for employees in those categories.
Very good. I have a motion to accept or to move this policy to second reading. Motion by Dixie Robinson,
Second.
second by Debbie. Any other comments or questions regarding that? Appreciate that cleanup. All those in favor of updating the policy as or moving the policy to second reading as requested, signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone opposed?
Thank you. Our next action item this evening is 4.03.
Just real quick
sorry?
before we move on, if you don't mind. How are we handling the, every board member, whether it's 2 board members or 3 board members per section for the policy committee? Are these supposed to go through the policy committee first before come back to the board, or are we going to continue? I guess I'm just interested in the future how we're doing.
I actually have that on my list for topics under
Oh, okay.
old business, because
Then I'll
I
just
feel
wait.
like we need to have that conversation, so I appreciate that.
I'll just wait.
Okay. Our next action item then is to request to increase summer meal prices. I'm going to ask Mr. Tidrow to speak to that.
Okay, thank you. The following item is submitted for your consideration and for approval. During the summer, Richmond Community Schools Food Services Department provides catered breakfast and lunch meals to outside entities. We are requesting that the prices for these meals are increased according to the following table. For breakfast, we currently charge about $1.75. We propose a increase of 15 cents to $1.90. For lunch, the current price is $2.85. Again, a 15-cent increase to $3. And the recommendation is that the Board of School Trustees approves the request to increase summer meal prices as presented.
All right, do I have a motion? Dixie makes the motion.
I
Update
just got a
the,
question, but I guess I have to get a motion first.
Yes.
I'll second.
Okay, Dixie makes the motion and Debbie seconds it. Now, do you have,
There was a question earlier in the week about the proposed new prices of $1.90. Is there state regulations on that, or would it be similar? Because going to even $2 instead of having to deal with the
Yeah,
time
there's
and change
there's
every
requirements
time?
we have to meet when we do that increase, and then the entities that we cater to, then they get reimbursed from the state as well. So
Sure.
to provide that, so there are some requirements we have to meet for those price increases. So
Okay, I never saw an answer to that. That's why I was
Oh, I'm sorry.
asking. I can't remember. Was it John that John asked about going from $1.90 just to even $2 to just to clean it up, and we're not dealing with change.
It's really based on there's a spreadsheet that they give us that we run to put in all the data, and it spits
Okay.
out the recommendations, so.
Okay.
And then
So does it have
for
to
the
do
audits.
with reimbursement from the state or profit
Yeah,
loss
the-
from us?
Yeah, the reimbursement and and how much we can make off of that, so.
Isn't it also related to the number of students and socioeconomic status and some of that too, or no?
I think how many meals they do, so, right.
Well, and if you raised it, wouldn't you be making, then you'd be making
Too much money?
too much
Yeah,
money?
we don't make too much, so.
Yeah.
For the sake of the public, why are we proposing a raise?
Well, this meal does not affect the students. The students still get free meals. When they walk up, they get, they don't pay anything. Students, children under the age of 18 get free breakfast or lunch. This is to the catered services that will then get reimbursed from the state for their time and for serving that. So, say the Parks Department, so.
Okay.
So to clarify, you are not raising school lunch prices.
No,
You are
this is-
strictly
I'm sorry,
raising the price that we have to charge to other entities.
To the catered.
Who use
Right.
our summer school feeding program.
This is not for this, yes, it's not for
Okay.
our summer school, it's for the catered services during the summer.
I just want to make
So,
sure that
yeah,
they
you're
knew
exactly
that.
right.
Secondly, are we offering meals for students or families or anything in the summertime?
That's what you just said.
Right, we have several
Thousands.
summer feeding sites throughout the summer, different locations, so.
I didn't ask that the way I wanted to. Where are we offering that?
We'll have those posted once the final decision's made, but usually we locate those areas where we have a lot of traffic, a lot of people that can get to there. We've used Vale, we've used Star, we use the summer school sites, like this year, if we have summer school at Hibbard, then we'll have it there, we have it at the high school. So different places where we feel the kids are gonna be able to get to those spots, so.
The reason I asked that question and the way that I asked it came out wrong. I'd been thinking about that because one of the sessions that I attended at the NSBA was in regards to the meals that we provide. And I think the public really needs to understand that Richmond Community Schools goes above and beyond when it comes to the offerings for food services that we give. It's not just during the school year or during the school day, but we're providing it to students, families, et cetera, throughout the year. And I don't think the public really understands that or knows. So,
But we do, yes. you're
yeah,
right.
we do.
All right. All those in favor of the increase as presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Copiers.
Thank you.
All right, our next action item is 4.04, request to advertise to accept bids for copiers. Mr. Tidrow.
Okay, the following item is submitted for your consideration for approval. That the Board of School Trustees approve the request to advertise for bids for copiers for the district. The notice to bidders will be published in the Palladium Item on Friday, April 13th, 2018, and Friday, April 20th, 2018. Proof of publication will be on file in the Business Affairs Office. All bids and bid documents received will be on file in the Office of the Chief Operations Officer. This bid will be analyzed and a recommendation will possibly be made at the May 23rd, 2018 board meeting. As a recommendation, the administration recommends that the Board of School Trustees approve the request to advertise for bids for copiers for the district.
I'll approve the motion to be
Okay.
advertised for bid.
Motion from Jeff, second. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Aaron. Any comments or questions regarding the copiers?
I would just, could the board members get emailed a copy of the bid packet? Is that, I'm just interested in the number of copies and number of,
And are we using, like now that we have laptops, are we using more paper or less paper? Or do you know?
Since we haven't had a full year to look at that, I hate to express anything, but a lot of times, when you go into, since we use a lot of non-textbooks now, we still use hard copies. So when we look at that at the end of the year, full
Just
year, I
be-
think we'll be able to see,
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
right, what you have is a lot more opportunities for people to print, but we also
Because
have a
everyone
lot
has a
of,
device.
yeah, we have more devices. When
Right,
you
that
have,
makes sense.
Yeah.
it's, you know, and that's why I think a lot of times you don't see that decrease is because more people are now publishers, so they can create content and spit it out there, so.
I will tell you, based on the building orders for paper that come through our office, they are down a little bit. A little bit. Like Rob said, it's hard to tell right now because we're not full through the whole year, but
We'd like to be down
Yeah, I
10%.
would just add, I mean, my son's a freshman, my daughter's a senior. I think Jack's paper volume is way down compared to hers. And I'd like, I mean, I think that should be a goal number. I mean, we should realize some savings from 1 to 1. You know, people are just printing to not look at the screen, and then we need to identify that as a reasonable.
I will say that the generation that we're dealing with, the students, they're less apt, I think, to rely on hard copy. My generation, we grew up with hard copies, so a lot of times it's easier, as you can see, to use this. So they're used to looking at screens this big a lot of times, so you should see it. They don't want to carry around hard copy. They don't want to deal with it, so we should see an increase.
Right. Did we vote on that one?
You have not voted yet.
Okay. We do have a motion, a second though, right? All right, so all those in favor of approving advertised bids for copiers signify by saying aye.
I,
Hearing, any opposed? Okay. All right.
Next action item is 4.05, and that is the request GAMP Trust Fund appropriation. Mr. Tidrow.
So Civic Hall Associates is now ready to begin work on some of the Phase 3 enhancements utilizing the GAMP Trust funds. The following projects are recommended to be funded at this time. A replacement of carpeting in the main house of Civic Hall, its balcony, the mezzanine lobby, and the balcony lobby. Estimated cost of that is $38,152.05. Currently, the Civic Hall Associates has $32,127.63 of that from Stage 2 that will flow over, needing approximately $6,000 to complete that project. Also, a few other projects that would be in that Phase 3 would be addition of a shore power in the loading dock area. That way, as bands and so forth bring their own trucks and so forth, they can get power out there easier instead of going through the doors and so forth. We can have it right there for them to hook up to. Replacement of the stage floor covering. This is on top of the subfloor. We have another piece of, I think it's 1/4 inch protected surface. This is original. I think it's 25 years old. So although it's in pretty good condition, we're starting to see a little bit of warpage and so forth. So that's approximately $12,000. And then retain a cash balance in the account for emergency expenditures and other additional Phase 3 projects. So the recommendation is that the Board of School Trustees approves the appropriation of $41,376.39 to the Civic Hall budget to cover these projects and other incidental costs. And just to let you know, that would leave a balance of $100,000 in the GAMP Trust Fund that would still be in the Richmond Community Schools control. So
Have we pretty much completed, I mean, did we get everything done we wanted to do with that money?
Round
with that money,
3.
right, that we proposed, and we just got new stage lighting, we got the new sound system in, and Mike Rogan has done an excellent job installing that. And then as you go to new shows, make sure you see the new lights and so forth. They got them in a few weeks ago, so a lot of our student performances have been utilizing those. So.
Oh, great.
You can
And
tell
I-
an immediate difference in with the
Yeah.
LED lights. They're bright, yeah, colorful. They're sharp. The sound system is excellent.
And so on the carpeting, we will not be doing the carpeting between the seats, because that would require lifting up all those seats, and the way those bolts are in there would probably damage some of those bolts. And I think the bolts were into the concrete from below, so it would be a huge project. And so, but the carpet that's going to be there will remain, and will match what we put in the aisle and the mezzanine and so forth.
It
So.
probably doesn't get a lot of traffic, so it's probably in good shape, right?
Oh, yes. So.
All right.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, I was
We
thinking, I
approve.
think we didn't make a motion, so. Jeff makes the motion to move the GAMP Trust appropriation forward. Do I have
I'll
a second?
second.
Second by Brad. Any other comments or questions?
I thought last time we had talked about releasing all the funds. Has there been any thoughts on that?
Well, not really. I mean, we just kind of, I like bringing it to the school board and having you guys weigh in on it, so it keeps another check and balance into that, so. I think we'll have a little bit of balance there for emergencies, you know, and right now, we don't really have anything else to do, but I like having that checks and balance. I mean,
On the shore power at the loading docks, are you doing multiple RV hookups and things like that, or for tour buses?
it'll be for the power, yes.
I mean,
We won't do any other kind of hookups.
yeah,
Is that what you're asking? or
no,
is that
I
what
meant the 220
Right.
power for RVs and.
Correct.
Okay.
Because you've seen some of those tour buses, they're gigantic.
Right, I
you
mean,
know,
it's,
so.
it's similar to an RV as far as the auxiliary power. So, right.
I would say if you haven't had a chance, drive by and see the new sign outside of Civic Hall.
That's part of the GAMP fund.
Yeah.
And part of RCS, we put some,
Yeah.
because it's gonna be used by all of us.
It looks really nice.
All right, all those in favor of the fund appropriation signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Yeah, our next action item this evening is 4.06 C.R. Richardson sale. And I'm gonna ask Ron if he would speak to this.
Mr. Terrell, President Darren board members, you had sent to you, I believe, a draft copy of what I've called a comfort resolution. It's just a resolution that summarizes the processes that have been engaged by the board in getting to the point where we're ready to close on the sale of CR to Goodwill Education Initiatives. That's closing is going to be a remote closing, that is by mail, but it'll be, we hope, effective and completed by the end of this week. The resolution, the gist of the resolution is that, you know, the board finds that Goodwill is a not-for-profit corporation organized for purposes, among others, that include providing educational services. And you also made findings of the existence of the current two leases, one to Goodwill, one to the YMCA. The total future rentals at the time you entered into the purchase agreement in December was just under $145,000. And based upon those findings, you determined that the consideration being paid for the building itself, you've deemed to be nominal, as that term is used in the cited statute of Indiana Code 36-1-11-5.5. Please recall, we talked about this at length. I know it's technical and it's legalistic, but that is the legal basis by which we are able to directly deal with Goodwill and not have to go through the bidding process, the appraisal process, or what have you. The statute as written says that you could have transferred the property to Goodwill for no consideration, for nothing. We negotiated a price that included assigning the rentals as well as the building and the property, and the result is the $175,000 purchase price. I'm confident that's still, relatively speaking, nominal, as the statute uses that term. And then the remaining resolution deals with the authorization and execution of documents that are necessary to complete the closing in the appropriate manner that is prevalent for transactions of this nature, authorizing the president, the secretary, or the vice president in the absence of either of the first two to sign such documents as require their signature, and further that the superintendent and any of his designees can sign such other documents do not require a direct board execution. So that's it. There have been no substantive modifications in the resolution since the one I sent to you. We did add a sentence allowing, authorizing modifications in any documents that you'd reviewed or seen that are approved by the superintendent with the advice of council. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the resolution for the C.R. Richardson sale as presented? Motion by Aaron Stevens. Second? Second by Debbie Moore. And do I have any comments or questions?
I'll be voting no. I would like to have seen this held off till the master plan was completed, and also I would like to have seen us go through the normal bid process for this property.
Okay. That being said, any other comments or questions?
Well, I have one question. How do I say this? For example, if a possibility that we may close down Hibbert, then we'll have all that property to negotiate with instead of just one. How does that affect us? I guess I'm not sure. Would it be, I guess I'm questioning myself, like, would it be better for us just to keep things the way they are and wait and see what happens, or just go along with our plan? I don't know. I'm a little confused because we'll have all of that property and we could
Well,
do
but I
it
think
all
that's
at
why
one time.
John is stating that he's voting for it now, because he wanted to wait until after.
This is, and we had
This
this
is
discussion.
quite of a backtrack, guys, though. That's
Quite
the
a
only thing.
backtrack. But
No, I'm not trying to backtrack.
No.
It's just a question.
We, we tried to have a lot of these discussions early, and there was a push by several members to get this done too, so,
And I was one of them.
but we're there now,
Okay,
so.
that's fine. That's fine. Thank you.
All those in favor of approving the resolution as presented signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
All right. That's, I should have said same sign, so. Just one, correct.
And before we move on to the next topic, something that I would like for us to consider is, since we have so many things on the plate for the near future, this would also be perfect money that we could transfer into the rainy day fund.
Yeah.
You gotta sell the building, you've got collected rents. I don't have the total in front of me on collected rents, but, there may be some earmarks for it, but, the rainy day fund is a good place to put things when you're looking at one-time expenditures, so I'm not suggesting that we talk about it tonight, but let's think about that. Because I'd like to see that money isolated and separated into the rainy day fund.
Made a note of that, I'm sure. All right, overnight field trips.
I'm gonna ask Dr. Reynolds if he would just handle 407 and 408 together. Dr. Reynolds.
Yep, absolutely, thank you. I have two field trips for your approval this evening. The first field trip is for Richmond High School for the Skills USA Club to compete in Indianapolis this weekend. It's part of our career and technical education program. I think it's something that we typically do, and we've had a lot of success recently. Students will leave Friday morning and head down for an exam, opening ceremonies, and I think some assessment prior to the competition on Saturday. So I bring for you approval for the Richmond High School Skills USA Club for an overnight field trip for April 13th to April 14th.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the overnight trip to Indianapolis for Skills USA?
I move to approve the Skills USA Club field trip.
I'll second.
Very good.
I
Any,
have a question.
yes, I was just asking.
Mr. Amos is no longer employed at RCS, correct?
He's no longer the teacher.
Okay.
He still has the ECA assignment
Okay,
of the
that's
club.
all I was getting.
Similar to a lay coach. One thing I was gonna throw out here too, the Skills USA used to be a one-day thing. The way their organization is set up, they had to go to a two-day with a Friday night and Saturday to, it was part of their funding formulas to be able to get grant monies and things like that. That's why it's a two-day now instead of a one-day.
Dr. Reynolds?
Yes.
This is a PTD test.
I looked it up. I had to look it up.
I could. All right.
Okay, I'll defer, absolutely.
It's hilarious. It changes every year, but I mean, we prep some of the kids all the time to go to this thing, and one of the funniest things is when you ask someone to pass the salt, do you pass the salt? Do you pass the salt then the pepper? Do you pass the salt and the pepper, or do you say reach for it? So we always joke that, hey, if there's that question, you always pass the salt and pepper together. It is literally an attribute test, kind of general common knowledge, manners are involved. If a bed is, the wheels are pointing backwards on a bed, which direction is the bed moving? You know, it just, and the only reason they have to take that test is if the hands-on skills competition is a dead tie, the written performance on the competition is a dead tie. This is the final tiebreaker.
Man, look at the intelligence.
Couldn't they
on the
just
board.
arm
And
us?
I am telling you, we laugh about it all the time. Now, some of the questions have a lot of merit, some of them you laugh at, but, you know, just, I've gone to a new curriculum in this year too, and some of it I've laughed at, but then you see the kids test on it, and you're like, holy cow, this may have some merit to it. And, you know, some of the, as you were talking, Mr. Chidrow, your generation was paper, and then, and so, I don't think I'm that much older than the kids, but, you know, the common knowledge we had
You are.
is not there now.
You are.
Sorry about that.
Again, I refer to, he started on the board the year I graduated.
Yeah.
But,
And we use stone, okay? Forget, when did paper come along?
So it's a tiebreaker, but there's some
it's all part of it, but
ethics and
that
problem solving.
Friday
and stuff.
night, they have their opening ceremonies, and several opportunities for the kids as far as like mixers and
Sure.
networking abilities and things like that. They also tend to have their officers that campaign for state seats really mingle through that, and it's a really,
It's a really good program.
it really
I'm glad
is.
That it's, that we're going.
So my second question then would be, who outside of Brad Walton would have known the answer to that question?
Apparently, Mr. Reynolds knew.
I looked up the test, I didn't know what it was used for.
Tiebreaker is
ask
very
Brad.
helpful.
By the way, the national competition for this is in Louisville again this year. I think this may be the final year it's in Louisville, then it moves to Atlanta. It's in June, and I would encourage everyone, especially going through this master plan and looking at, of course, I'm biased with the CTE thing, but to go and experience this. There's usually over 50,000 people that attend this conference nationwide. All 50 states are represented. And the money and scholarships that are given away are unbelievable. It's just unbelievable.
Well, we've had a lot of our kids there.
Yes.
Yeah,
The-
I would just add that, I mean, we send kids all over the country almost, between BPA and HOSA just finished their thing, and I think the West End money has gone to some of these trips, if I understood. I know they paid for part of BPA. I mean, the package, all these together, that would be kind of a nice, big sponsorship opportunity for, you know, say, would you like to sponsor our professional
Or teams. Yeah, that'd be
across
fun.
the country for 25 or 30,000? I mean, I don't know who'd work on it. Maybe that's something the board could work on just through contacts. But you know, we send a lot of kids all over that, and these are our best and brightest for the most part. I think
That's a fun.
it could be a way to attach.
Yeah,
some-
we are actually working, I'm working with Mr. Cochran and Mr. Hill right now on one piece of that, because what we would like to do is bring a sponsorship program to the board. I feel like it's very important that the board pass anything that we would do that is more than just requesting donations. And so we have begun work, well, actually, we've been working on it for about 6 months now, and we're getting very close to the end stages of it, but with the goal in mind to get that to you later this spring, early this summer, for sponsorship programs, and that could be utilized for a number of different purposes.
So is that
with a number of
athletics or
different-
everything?
That's part of it, but the end result would be for anything at RHS that you would like to sponsor, and to provide some flexibility and some options to anyone who might want to do that, so.
Awesome.
How would that dovetail with the endowment that people want to start? Or wouldn't that be kind of,
Foundation.
or the foundation, I mean, endowment? or
That would be
foundation?
a conversation to have when it happens.
Yeah.
I think that it could align with it easily. I think that that's something that there are other areas of what we do in donations that would have to be looked at as well, so I would think that would come up naturally at that time.
Is your sort of thought to compact a number of these where we go out multiple times throughout the year.
That's what I said, you wouldn't want multiple, you wouldn't want many parallel stuff, you'd want it all coordinated, I would think.
Yes, however, what it does is it would just provide an option to those who do donate to us. What I have heard from a few different places that we receive what I would call fairly regular donations is that they would like to see some of those options, but it may not work for them. So they may still like to see some of those littler requests come through. So it's more of just providing a streamlined approach for those who would like it.
Especially for the ongoing major kinds of things. But these would be possibilities, so, very good. All right, I think, do we still need to vote on this one, don't we?
Yep.
All those in favor of approving the Skills USA trip signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Second field trip I have is for the Richmond High School speech team. Mr. Swango would like to take the folks to the National Speech and Debate Association National Contest in Fort Lauderdale, providing we have qualifiers. That trip is June the 17th to June 23rd. Itinerary is attached, very similar to last year. I think we had some conversation last year about how they got to the airport, and they're going to have those parents take them to the airport.
Are you requesting the chaperone on this one too?
No, it's not Disney. I'm gonna pass on that.
Do I have a motion to approve the Speech Nationals in Fort Lauderdale overnight trip?
I move that we do.
Motion from Dixie, second from Debbie. Any questions about this one? They have to qualify to go, and we don't know that yet. Is that what I understand? Okay, very good.
Did you say that the parents are providing the transportation to the airport?
I mean, I just would give a huge shout out to the teachers. I mean, that's a huge, I mean,
Major commitment in
all
June.
these teachers, not the two here, but I mean, for all these groups, I mean, it's awesome. I mean, they make the events, they do the planning, every dot, every cross T, so it's impressive.
And making that commitment to do that is huge.
Right. Well, that's another group too that's done
Oh,
Oh, very well.
Mr. Schwengo's really kicked it up a notch, and I think that's great. All right, all those in favor of approving the overnight trip for the speech team signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Now, to our work session, yes?
For our work session this evening, we are pleased to have Mr. Bill Payne here with us tonight from Fannie Howie to give us our kind of culmination report on our educational facility master planning process. So without further ado,
Okay,
Bill,
great.
turn it over to you.
President Darengowski, board members, Mr. Terrell. When we started this process, I'm pretty confident that I said that it would take about a year. Our cabinet kickoff meeting was in fact March 9th of 2016. So we missed it by a month and a day or two. Sorry about that. But actually, the depth and the breadth of this study, all the things that we looked at, researched, talked with you about, and developed, I don't think we could have or would have wanted to do it any faster. So quite frankly, we're pleased that we touched all of these steps in the process of getting to where we're at. And so I'd like to provide this evening an overview or a summary of the report. And these are the components that are included in the report. We'll walk through each one of these briefly. I have a few comments on each. And then we have some new information this evening. Some building improvement plans that we have not looked at for Richmond High School to date, and then opinion of probable costs on all of your school facilities based upon the findings of this report. So I think this is a perfect way to start out, and Dr. James Halleck was our facilitator with a wide-ranging group of participants, students, community members, business leaders, teachers, and we really focused on those 2 days on aspirational thoughts about where you are as a school corporation and where you want to be and how you perceive yourself. And so it was less, quite frankly, it was very much less about a discussion about facilities as much as it was about where you're at and where you want to be in the future. And it's very important to us as we're thinking about ultimately the types of facilities and features that need to house those programs. We need to hear that. And so the findings were broken down into 3 major areas: instruction, brand, and absolutes. And so that was a great way, I think, to start off and really envision in the future where you want to be from an educational standpoint. The next step, and some of these sort of overlapped, admittedly, so they weren't necessarily all nose to tail, but our preservation specialist, Jim Kinley, produced a report, and I hope you all have had a chance to take a look at that. We really asked him to identify the historic fabric, and by that what we mean is the features on the building that are of particular importance historically that we should always consider maintaining, retaining, or restoring in any facility initiative, and that includes both surfaces and materials as well as just the architectural character, such as the main entrance inside Richmond High School and those original corridors. Jim went on to show a lot of additional detail, which I had no clue about, and see some of the architects that I recognize from my history books, so I hope you've all, as well as your communities, found that informative. But that certainly will inform anything that might be done at those 4 buildings in the future. Then Whiteman and Associates, our consultant, prepared a demographic study. There were some interesting things that came out of that, possibly some that you had already anticipated or guessed at in terms of the reasons for population decline. But the key component of that was the 10-year enrollment projection, which the most likely line, as you all recall, would be a continued decline and leveling off over that period of time. So this certainly gives us the information that we need as we're taking a look at the overall capacity of facilities and how we want to accommodate both student population and programs going forward. We prepared a capacity analysis, and so we used rubrics that we typically use within when designing or considering school facilities. We also took into consideration your practices in terms of class sizes, programming, and so forth. And what we identified through that process was that there is excess capacity in general, with the exception of a few of the elementary schools, excess capacity available within your school facilities, both at Richmond High School and at the PK-8 level. That could change if you were to contemplate grade configuration changes. There's been a lot of discussion about that. We're not encouraging you to make any of those changes, but as you all know, both through the community surveys, community meetings, there was a fair amount of discussion about that. And so basically a change in grade configuration means you would be moving groups of students in grades to different buildings, and that could have an impact on some of those buildings in terms of that excess capacity. But right now, probably with the exception of Charles, there is excess capacity in all of your facilities. We conducted building evaluations. We toured each one of the buildings. It was very important that we did that with your maintenance staff because they're certainly most knowledgeable about your buildings, and so they were great eyes and ears for us. And as a result, we put together a graph and showed that from our perception, as well as what we saw and heard, that your buildings have been well maintained. However, even well-maintained buildings still have systems that start to reach their useful life over time. And so in talking with your maintenance personnel, we identified those components. And so in fact, we were suggesting, or we have suggested, a 2 to 5 year time frame at which some of those components, such as a chiller or a boiler or some finishes, may in fact reach their useful life, and we would project that they should be replaced, and you'll see that ultimately in the opinion of probable costs. So, armed with all of that information at that point in time, we proceeded with the first round of community input sessions. And as you recall, we shared this information, as we just talked about, in summary, with community members at 4 different sites. Then we used our software system, Turning Point, so we gave everybody an input device. And we went through a series of questions, and those questions that were asked of that group, they had an opportunity to vote or offer their opinion in real time. Those were all tabulated, And the questions were the same at each one of the 4 meetings, so that then we could aggregate all of those together. And by the way, everything that we've developed so far has all been posted on your website, which I think is a wonderful process. So we're informing the community as you go. As we're discovering, they're also being informed. So we came back to the board, and you may recall we had offered up some possible changes both in terms of capacity and building usage. And it was at that point, and I think a wise move, that the board felt like we haven't had enough discussion on the programming that happens in the buildings. Even though we know we have some excess capacity, we can accommodate current programs, and most likely, if we change or offer different programs in the future, we have capacity. But let's have that discussion, and let's have a robust discussion. And so we went back as a team, primarily Richmond Community Schools with our assistants, went back to those communities, talked with folks about those programs at all grade levels, as well as athletics, and in fact also did the online surveys. And so not only did we have good response during the community meetings, we also had significant participation in Facebook Live during those community meetings, which was fascinating. Quite frankly, I had not seen that before, so we're impressed. We're going to make sure that's done in the future. And then we also received a total of 391 responses on the online surveys, and those were also aggregated and provided for everybody to see. So I think that was a really good process. I think going forward, that's going to inform decisions ultimately that you all will make as you consider programming currently and in the future, but that certainly was helpful. So we took all this information and we call it filters. So many filters that help to inform a facility improvement plan. But some of the key things that go into our consideration as we're presenting this information to you. So we know that we have some excess capacity at the PKA buildings. But that also gives you the opportunity to serve both current and future programming. There are strategic infrastructure improvements that are recommended. And again, we not only toured the buildings and we prepared our recommendations on those infrastructure improvements, then we went back to your facility staff and talked to them again because we wanted to make sure that we heard correctly. And even in that feedback loop, we received some additional information, which is included this evening in this report. Right now, I don't think that grade configuration changes are being contemplated. I only make that third bullet point in that our recommendations are made based upon essentially the current grade configuration in those buildings moving forward. If you were to make a significant change in that, then that may influence population within a building and may have an impact on what we would do there. But right now, we're anticipating our recommendations are based on keeping those current grade configurations. So Richmond High School, and I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that you all had anticipated going into this, that the bulk of the work, the needed work, both in terms of infrastructure and responsiveness to your educational vision, this is probably where most of the work might be required. So we know from our study that we have excess capacity at the high school that can be repurposed, and we'll show you that, repurposed to better facilitate the programming that you want to do both academically as well as co-curricular. We know that multiple building systems need to be updated. And so by reorganizing and repurposing those spaces within the high school, I think there's no question that you can reach for that desired learning environment that was envisioned at the very beginning of this study and that we've heard throughout the community input sessions. So let's jump into some of the new information that we have. And I know we've shared some of this, I think, verbally, but not in plan, and ultimately architects were visually oriented, so we love plans, building plans. So the first one that I'm going to show you is called classroom utilization. So one of the first things we always do whenever we're studying buildings, we want to know how the buildings are utilized. And so we have indicated this by two colors, occupied and unoccupied, and let me explain what that means. So this is based upon the fall semester of 2017-2018 calendar. And so what we have shown is, I guess another way we could have said is, occupied is assigned spaces by class. So we looked at the class schedule. So wherever those rooms were scheduled for classes, part day or full day, those are in blue. The unoccupied are the unassigned spaces that are not being used academically. Now, that's not to say that those spaces are not used at all during the day. It's just that they're not assigned a class activity. And
Bill, I'm going to stop you. I have some real questions.
yes.
Some of those unoccupied spaces you have listed include the 5 computer labs, the biomed lab,
Fair enough.
the construction lab, the foods lab, just to start. And I'm not sure how the data was developed,
It was taken directly from the high school schedule.
but I have some big concerns of your identifications.
Okay, so, and if you looked at, for instance, I was just comparing, if you looked at the 2016 schedule, some of the spaces that are indicated as unoccupied would have been occupied, others may have not. So I guess what I'm suggesting is I think there is an opportunity there by making changes to better utilize that space that's maybe not fully utilized during the day. So I'm not suggesting that you're, how should I say, and there's some more information I'd like to share in terms of classroom sizes as well, which I think help to inform the selections that staff are making, that administration's making. All I'm saying is that our study would say there's more square footage here than you would typically see for a student population of the size there.
I mean, I can concede that point, I think,
Yes.
square footage wise. But I think of all the rooms identified, I think I counted 9 as truly unoccupied.
So, you know, some of those rooms, I wouldn't be surprised, some of those rooms may be in fact used for, say, teacher collaboration, student collaboration outside of the normal classroom schedule. I'm sure that they're being possibly used in certain ways, and ultimately what we're going to suggest is that by reorganization and repurposing, we may actually facilitate that even better than what it presently is. So rather than just sort of finding available space, maybe it's programmed in a way so that it's located adjacent to departments and better serves those purposes. And then, of course, we looked at the other areas. So each one of these, there are 2 plans so that we can identify second and third level, as well as on the first plan, we also show the lower level. Fair enough. So, for instance, here would be a perfect example. Certainly the Tiernan Center is used, so it has no color represented on it, but I'm sure that there are activities going on there. So you're correct, Mr. Weber.
I mean, I'm not trying to cause a problem, but
No.
I just wonder if our raw data maybe is not as accurate as we might have hoped it was.
Okay, and what I'm suggesting is, if we look at this, if we look at the building generally in terms of use and why maybe it's being used the way it is, and therefore what are the opportunities through an improvement, a facility improvement plan to make it better utilized, that's sort of where we're going. So we're not, how should I say, not criticizing what's currently happening rather than showing opportunities.
I mean, I think there's always opportunity to do better. I would not disagree with that at all. But I think the high school has evolved into what we have over there.
Yes.
In May, in some cases, be best utilizing that space currently. I would throw out there. But, I mean,
So admittedly,
it's not perfect.
right. So admittedly, this is a relatively high-level report. So if, for instance, you were to say, select a classroom like 216 and say, so Bill, what would be your plans in that room? Our filters are relatively high level at this point, and the costs that we're showing, that we're applying, would be based upon our experience and knowledge. But the reality is you would have to decide as a board to proceed with the initiative and then commission a firm to go forward with the design at that point in time. Then we would apply, we would go to the greater level of detail. But you wouldn't want to do that before you decided to do something.
And John, to your point, I think Heidi Hisrich's class is a perfect example. So she has 2 rooms that are at the corner. She's got one that you have to go down the steps to her lab space.
Her lab's marked unoccupied.
Right, but she uses it all the time.
Correct.
But So the challenge is she has kids and students in 2 different levels even, and the best supervision isn't. So if we were to recreate that space where it was more,
But
maybe-
typically they're in one space or the other.
right. And so if you could have, one of the things that we've seen in other, as we've looked at plans, architectural planning of different buildings, is maybe that lab is in between 2 classrooms with glass walls that are movable. And then when she's not utilizing it, maybe the other teacher is. And so therefore you're able to utilize that space just a little bit better than it currently is. Not to say that it's not used at all.
And I understand, I mean, my point is, I mean, so is that a $70 million improvement? I mean, for a little improvement. I mean, it's our cost benefit, you know, what are we gonna gain? You know, like the 3rd floor lecture hall is marked unoccupied. I think it's rare to have a college-style lecture hall in a high school. You would probably agree that it's not an auditorium. Is that used all day, every day? No, but is it used?
Yes.
I would suggest maybe we used the wrong terminology, and maybe it should have been assigned, unassigned, and that might have better described what we're after. Whereas an unassigned would be available for these other uses, not that it's not being used.
I mean, I don't disagree. I think we've kind of overestimated our space, I think.
The amount of open space.
Yes. I mean, literally, I spent the day over there in nine rooms, 3 of which are model classrooms that were truly unoccupied. I mean, one is the alumni office that's marked unoccupied, and that's been the alumni office for how long? Ever, maybe?
2 years, I think. I mean, we've had it down in the high schools, it's moved, but, yeah,
It's been in that area.
But they've always had a room.
they've had something.
So, I mean, and I think there's a benefit to having an alumni office in the high school. Could we use that for an educational purpose instead? Of course. So I don't,
I think too, there are some rooms that if I'm next to one and I can open up the wall between, and no one else is using that, then I'm using both of them now as a teacher. We do have that in some locations, whereas should just take up, if we had enough capacity, if we had enough or more students in there, you may not have that opportunity. So they may be in one room, you may see them as one room, but it's really 2, you know, because you have a dividing wall. So we have a few opportunities like that. It's kind of like what Mrs. Hittrick does. I mean, she's really assigned to one room, but since that's available, she can expand out and use a lab and a lecture
the art room's another
facility. So
example there. It's basically an open space. It's
Right.
considered 2 rooms.
it's
The
3
art-
rooms, actually.
The art teacher uses one portion, and right now they're doing prom prep in the other. So it's to say there's, I mean, and it was homecoming prep before, and it's
So when you said you might change your terminology to assigned and unassigned, you were more talking about those that are assigned to a class every day?
Right.
Those that are multi-use?
Available for multiple use, like a computer lab. So obviously, we're not suggesting that there's no
Not
use for the
used.
computer lab, it's just that it's not assigned as a class use. You know, if we look at this in total, and this is good, I really appreciate you bringing that up, Mr. Weber. If we take a look at this in total, I think you're gonna see at the end, we're not suggesting that you don't use any of the space. We're gonna suggest that by a repurposing, reorganization, you can use all of that space to better effect. So for instance, this next one, classroom size, relatively simple analysis, but I think this helps to explain, and Mr. Tidrow was just sort of, and Mr. Terrell was just sort of going that direction, I think. So we've shown several class sizes from relatively small to relatively large. And so in fact, we've just done some basic observations. Some of those very small spaces, not surprising, they're in the more historic part of the high school. Typically, they're smaller. And so they're probably not as desirable. And so in some cases, they're either housing very small classes or not assigned as many class periods because teachers, staff, everybody's gravitating to the larger spaces. And that might indicate a better, you know, a possibility that we start to think in terms of whether it's some wall removals, enlarging of classrooms, say going from 3 classrooms to maybe 2, we can better utilize that space, make it more effective learning space. So that's why we're going through this process, is to sort of explore that.
When I was looking at, actually in the report, not your PowerPoint, but you have the same thing in your report. I keep, you know, I hear the term quite frequently, flexible learning environment, and, you know, we got all these new buzzwords that's come out in the last couple years, which is a great marketing plan, but I was trying to think of, in the past, we had state statutes or requirements that said per child, we needed so many square feet. You know, in elementary, we needed, was it 35 square feet per child?
30 square feet is the metric,
And I
yes.
think at the high school, I think it was down to 25 or?
Nah, it's really been pretty much 30 throughout. It was a Board of Health number.
So I guess in my head, as I go forward thinking about this, I mean, we all admit that we have a long way to go. This is an initial kind of a presentation. But I'm trying in my head, okay, I can understand, well, here's our 600 square foot rooms, here's our 700 square foot rooms, here's our 800 square foot rooms, up to 900. And so this flexible learning environment, what kind of are we looking at any kind of number as far as square footage per student? Or are we just saying we want to put an environment out there that's 1,000 square feet and you use it how you want based on the furniture you put in the room? I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around, you know, geographically. Because let's say we put a plan together this year and we put all the English departments together and all the science departments together. All of a sudden now we're starting to talk about different classes. Well, even within those departments, you're going to have some classes that have 15 students in it. You're going to have some classes that have 30 students in it. So we're going to have the same, in a couple of years, we're going to have the same problem anyway. So I'm just trying to figure in my head how we are, what's the magic number for a flexible learning environment?
The magic in a flexible learning environment is actually a variety of space sizes. So there is certainly a use for what we call small group instruction, which would be a breakout space where maybe that's 4 to 5 students working collaboratively on a project. We still have use for a 900 square foot classroom, which has sort of been the metric for a long time. And that's based on 30 and 30 square feet per. And actually it's a Board of Health, and it was based on somebody's assumption about, quite frankly, it had to go into the vertical nature of a room. So if it was 9 to 10 feet tall by 30 square feet per student, that provided a healthy environment at the time that they established that metric. So that's where that came from. And there's still some validity to that, although we're exploring right now in the classrooms where the desks that have been put in with the casters, where that provides additional flow of students. And in fact, that was created for the purpose of, you can't always just go into a building and increase 800 or 750 square foot classrooms. So to answer your question, I think it's a variety, and you're exactly right. In the case of a science lab, where we might have 30, 32, maybe even 34 students, chances are not all of these science labs would accommodate that safely. And so in the reorganization, that certainly would be something we would take a look at. So it's sort of not one size fits all, but it's more a matter of exploring the different sizes that are needed, seeing what you have, and the benefit is probably a metric for a comprehensive high school program would be somewhere in the neighborhood between 225 to 250 square feet per student. So clearly at this point in time, yeah, well, but you have much more than that right now. So I guess what I'm saying is the silver lining is you've got the space to do the things that your community has suggested you'd like to do. It's a matter of, I think, reorganizing, repurposing selectively to do that. I would not suggest we go in and just automatically say, well, we can't use anything that's not 900 square feet, because we know that it's those small group rooms, those collaborative work areas, the variety of spaces that'll support the programming of the future and what we're seeing now. So does that sort of answer where you were hoping to hear?
I mean,
You want it to be clean, Jeff, and I don't
well,
think it's
not
gonna
so
be
much that, but you know, let's go back to Garrison. You know, Garrison was built open concept. Thought, oh man, this is great. We'll move our lockers and our walls around to accommodate, you know, have that flexibility. Now I realize we're not planning on all the walls to be
Half
completely
walls and all
gone
that,
and
right.
the
Right.
noise be an issue. But then as time goes, then that was outdated. you know, so.
They all put up walls.
That's true. So, you know, as I'm sitting there and I'm looking at with every teacher, with every class assigned, I mean, we could put a perfect plan together this semester and next semester. It may not work. That's why I'm trying to come up with an average in my head. You know, are we looking at 35 square feet per child? Or are we looking at, you know,
What's the
that's easier.
state statute for like lab space?
There isn't. It really more has to do with clearances. So it's a matter of clearance between lab tables and access and safety clearance. So there is not a particular number. So, for instance, Hamilton Southeastern, we have collegiate-size labs that are in fact the equivalent of like 3 labs of 3,000 square feet, and they were designed specifically that way so that there could be more teachers within that space and more classes, both AP as well as standard science classes and everywhere in between. But the key was, it was a separation, the safety clearances, access, and visual security, so it could be any size, really.
Okay. I didn't know if you there may not be a state guideline, but is there kind of a rule of thumb you guys kind of go by on that, or?
Well, it used to be that you'd put 24 students in 1,200 square feet. That would give you both lab and class space. I'm not sure that that's appropriate anymore. And there are a number of factors. One, there's less wet stuff being done and more stuff being done with technology.
Right.
So that sort of informs how we design those spaces as well. You made an interesting point about the open concept, and everybody wonders, wait a second, are we sort of going backwards here? And well, I won't go into the story about going down to Columbus as a freshman student at Ball State and seeing all those open plan schools and thinking, wow, these are so cool. My mother, the school teacher, when I told her about it, she said, that'd be anathema. I would never teach in one of those. What happened was, I think everybody jumped the gun. There were 2 things that were missing. One was a concern about acoustical control within those spaces. Number 2 was, there was no technology. I think that's the big game changer there, is now that students have access literally within our handhelds right here, I think that's changed things dramatically, and the understanding that even if you have these more open, flexible spaces, you have to be responsive to acoustical control so it doesn't become a nightmare. And that's why I said it's not always just everything's wide open, but I think it's a variety of types of spaces so that students, whether they're working individually, together, or still in some type of a class setting, you have all those opportunities. And again, I think you have enough square footage at Richmond High School to do those things with the projected student enrollment. But it'll just take some creative thinking as to how to reorganize that.
Well, and we talked before too about that front hallway where the walls are pretty thick.
Yes.
and the classrooms are tiny. Having those areas be where people come into the building, you know, like to see counselors, nurses, I don't, you know, whatever.
Right.
School.
Yeah,
Or
that
support
community,
services.
yeah, that all of that is in that front hallway, so you don't have adults going deep in the building and then you lose them because the building's so big
Right,
that you don't know where they're going
right. Yeah, it's
to.
easy.
Safety.
It's easier to make small spaces out of big spaces than big spaces out of small spaces. Learned that early in my career, so we try not to do that. Our structural engineers don't like us to do that, so you're exactly right. I don't think we would ever suggest that we would change dramatically that historic area out front. We'd preserve that, but we would find the appropriate uses to put into those smaller spaces. And then some of the other areas, as we've shown, where we have greater flexibility, like at the 3rd floor, what a great opportunity where we have that capacity, and maybe that's more of a large learning center, collaborative work area. Just a suggestion, but again, that's sort of our thinking in these plans.
Yeah, I guess I would agree. I mean, I would, you know, if there is a thought to combine the smaller historical classes or with the load-bearing walls, they're not any thick, they're load-bearing, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have basically no interest in opening up load-bearing walls to increase class size. And so
No.
if that is an option, I'd like it to be option Z, and would like to, you know, see a little more practicality, I guess, in the usage. And I think the alumni office, I think Falls uses one of those
Right.
rooms. I think we've kind of done that to some degree
currently. I know there's some foreign languages in some of them,
But it's not total.
but in
But as
some
you
are
said,
big.
you could make smaller spaces out of those spaces. Right now, we think, oh, they need to be bigger, but what if they're just in smaller pieces and they're one room makes 2 offices, etc.
Right. So, yeah, we're not suggesting that you eliminate the alumni office from the high school. We're just saying, let's find the right spaces for everybody, but let's also, where we have that opportunity, where we might modify and create larger, more useful spaces, and still accommodate your student population, let's see if we can do that. And again, not surprising in the historic area, you can see these are the smaller classrooms. The load-bearing walls, fortunately, are the corridors. And of course, the corridors have a character to them that's an important part of the historic fabric. So we certainly wouldn't want it to be disruptive to the corridor other than replacing lighting, doing things like that. But within the classrooms, if, for instance, the non-load-bearing walls, we might consider taking 3 classrooms and making 2 and making them more flexible and functional, then that might be an opportunity and something that we've done before. Okay, so this sort of suggests you're organized departmentally and you want to continue to do that, and that makes perfect sense. There's still a lot of departmental organizations throughout Indiana and throughout the United States, but this is starting to suggest, in our mindset, what if we were to start to group those more effectively, and this will again inform the level of work that might be required in areas. This is not by any means a final design. It's a suggestion, but it's a way to bring those departments, maybe group them more carefully and conveniently together, and put them in spaces such, for instance, we have, sorry, I need my glasses here because of the distance. So for instance, in the career tech, we're showing that where we already have larger spaces and we know that they need more space there. So that makes perfect sense. And then some of the more academic inclined areas, such as English and so forth, math, we're showing them grouped within some of the smaller spaces. But again, you can notice even in this plan, we're not changing the corridor relationships. We're not suggesting that we move any load-bearing walls. We're just suggesting that if we reorganize and sort of rethink how spaces are used, then we can incorporate some of those 21st century learning environment concepts without totally dismantling the building. And again, the other floors as well. And suggesting at this point, because we have enough space on the first 2 floors, that maybe that 3rd floor level, along with the lecture hall, is rethought in terms of possibly a learning commons and an area that may be a little bit more open and have more collaborative workspaces for students. So this final plan is sort of the synthesis of our thinking and our suggestions, our recommendations as to the level of consideration as to renovation or remodeling work that might be contemplated within these areas based on our observations of what we've seen, how the building might be reorganized. We obviously have a color coding for the corridor. But again, that's not to suggest that we're going to be disruptive to the fabric, the historic fabric certainly, but rather that there may be lighting improvements, HVAC improvements and so forth that take place within there. And the reason we've done it in this fashion is because this allows us to start to assign values based upon our experience with this type of a project, to start to project costs that would be involved without doing detailed design. Because that's the way these projects, these initiatives always start out, is that we need to make broad projections about what you want to do without doing the detailed design, going into the cost of doing the detailed design before you achieve your approval process.
Hence comes the square cost per foot.
Exactly. And again, we're using our expertise and our experience to make those projections.
Could you, and they don't have to be specific, but define at least a little better level 1, level 2, and possibly corridor renovation?
Okay, so corridor renovations, basically what we said was, let's look at that in total, and essentially we know that we're going to be doing infrastructure improvements, lighting, some finishes, probably locker updates, a number of things in there. And so based on our experience then, we assign, as Mr. Slifer was saying, a square foot value to that, which is ultimately yields our opinion of probable cost.
So are we looking at, like, floor coverings, wall coverings, lockers, ceiling?
Well, it's interesting because I think some would say that part of the historic fabric, certainly in the historical portion, is that flooring. So,
But it's all wax now.
yeah, exactly. It's got quite the protective cover over it. I'm not going to suggest a solution tonight, but clearly that has part of the character. But in some of the other corridors, yeah, we may have some hard surface or carpet that needs to be replaced, surfaces painted and so forth. So again, we've used sort of a unit cost across all of those corridors to identify those differently than, say, for instance, we have stairs separated. We've applied a different factor to that. Oops, sorry. This is an interactive screen, isn't it? And I just went, sorry. So what we've done is we've taken these different spaces, for instance, performance areas clearly in relatively good shape, and so we've applied a different number to that.
Like level 1 and level 2, though, specifically.
Okay, so level
Would
2.
that be to the studs?
Level 2 would be a pretty dramatic. Level 1 would be somewhere in the intermediate.
And then while not included, the HVAC, those costs, I mean, they're all kind of.
Yeah, so actually when I get into that level of detail, then I think I can explain that a little bit better as to how that breaks down. So we did not go to this level with the PKA buildings because, as I mentioned before, there were very specific infrastructure items that were identified in otherwise well-maintained buildings. And in fact, we've gone back both to your facilities staff as well as to the cabinet a couple times to reconfirm some of these. And so in each case, and there's greater detail and depth in the report, but in each one of these buildings then we identified things such as boiler chiller replacement. In some cases there was unit ventilator, you know, the units within the classrooms. In several instances, lighting replacement to LED. There was temperature control work. Some of these buildings still have the old pneumatic system, which does not give you the level of control nor energy efficiency that a total electronic system would be. So at some point we would recommend replacement of those pneumatic systems, which by the way, there are few and fewer skilled tradesmen that can work and repair and do that, and so you want to move to electronics. So we've shown that in some cases. There are several buildings where we know that there need to be security improvements at the entrances, and we've incorporated those in. And we've taken into account, for instance, the degree of difficulty. Some, it may be simply adding an additional layer of doors and a door that enters directly into the office. In some cases, you're actually walking into the lobby and the office is across the hallway, which is not unusual for older buildings. But again, somebody that's buzzed in could just continue on into the corridor system, and we know we don't want to do that in a safe and secure building. So that's been incorporated in. So each one of these buildings has unique needs, and we've identified those and projected the costs. And so these may be things that, again, we're showing them on a single page, but these may be projects that you would do individually over time, because again, some of these things are projected out 2 to 5 years. So it not necessarily says, oh, we have to do this tomorrow. Again, these could be segregated and identified as to the most critical need or prioritized. And then the total construction cost, let me sort of explain what's shown down at the bottom. The total construction cost is that cost that we would project to see on bid day. So for instance, if we bid all the work at Charles, we would expect to see on bid day $1,899,000. Then the associated attendant costs would be consultant costs for design, architecture, engineering, permits, contingencies, financing costs, all of those other things that are attendant with a project. Classroom furniture, and in some cases, for instance, upgrade of electronic, computer equipment, things like that.
So
Yes,
computer equipment would also be a soft cost then?
yes. Now,
Not the backbone and the
exactly, exactly. So the infrastructure, everything to the wall plate would be there. It would be all of the items that you would purchase that you would not want to pay a contractor to purchase for you.
Right. And that's assuming you have to possibly bond cost and all that kind of stuff?
Yes, right. Right, so you would have typically have a financial advisor and counsel and so forth, so those would be typically in that attendant soft cost as well. No land purchases anticipated, so that would not be in there. There may be,
But there's no annualized costs if you're looking at a 2 to 5 year plan, you're looking at today's cost though.
yes, that's correct. That's correct. Okay, so the high school obviously is a little bit more detailed, and I think, Mr. Weber, this will help break this down for you. So because it is a relatively large number and because there's a lot involved here, we broke it down specifically into 3 categories: infrastructure, envelope, and then we call, just for summary purposes, next gen. But think of this in terms of 21st century learning environments improvements. So the infrastructure costs, we've broken those out, and those are costs that would be associated with electrical improvements, mechanical, HVAC improvements, all of those basic things that have been identified both in our walkthroughs as well as your facilities staff that we would recommend doing to maintain the building in its current condition going forward. The envelope then, and these are things that I think would typically fall within infrastructure, but we wanted to identify those separately. One would be $500,000 for LED lighting on the perimeter. The re-roof, this would be the total number if you re-roofed all of those areas that are either out of warranty or reaching warranty. And again, that could be phased over time. And then the perimeter walls, tuck pointing, some window restoration, those types of things. So those are included in the building envelope. Then the last would be, okay, what if we did those other things, such as making changes, removing walls to create more flexible learning environments, making improvements to the space specifically to accommodate those types of improvements that we see beyond just keeping the classrooms in the size that they are, but actually modifying them and doing the other things that we would anticipate to create those 21st century learning environments that we heard from in the educational visioning. So theoretically, I mean, you could do infrastructure, and you would certainly be doing great work, and you could stop there. And you could also do a portion of infrastructure and do a portion of next gen or the envelope. So I realize this is a lot to absorb just in one moment, and I don't expect you to, but I just wanted to indicate that ultimately you'll be deciding on the priorities and what you see. But based on all of our study and everything that we've talked about, these are all things that rose to the level of importance.
Now, what did you say? I know you said it, but what did you say next gen is?
Okay, so I characterize that as those aspirational things of changing from our current classroom configuration, which would be, okay, so we've affected the HVAC, we've improved it, we've replaced basic finishes, we've replaced lighting, warm, safe, and dry. We're in good shape there. Now, what if we want to change the size of the science labs to better facilitate the programming that we want to accomplish? What if we want to combine 3 classrooms into 2 and introduce other types of environmental changes to make that a better learning environment? Those would be in the next gen, or those aspirational things to improve the learning environment.
So give me an example of next gen in the stairway.
Pretty limited. Probably would be signage, wayfinding, other types of things.
72,000, I don't call that pretty limited.
There's a lot of stairwells.
Then go to restrooms.
You have a lot of stairwells in that building.
What's a next gen restroom look like compared to a typical restroom?
Well, so fair enough. So
ADA compliant.
exactly. So basic restrooms would probably be actually the basic would be probably making those ADA improvements selectively. next gen would be to go in and do a more comprehensive improvement there. Restrooms, quite frankly, are the most costly per square foot of just about any space in a building. So once you introduce that plumbing aspect and all of those things. So we tried to give you sort of maybe the basic idea, the absolute needs, or at least from our perspective, and then give you maybe another level of improvements that could be considered.
Is there any way, I'm sure there isn't, to guesstimate energy savings?
Yes, so that would be the next step, would be if we replace all of the HVAC, we could energy model the entire building and take a look at what you're paying now versus what you would be in the future with all those improvements.
Substantial over there.
Well,
Yeah,
Nick,
I would-
I mean, he didn't bring in the gold, or the Energy Star rated, the net
Yeah.
zeroing, all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Right.
Solar panel ready, all that stuff.
Would that
Right.
be next-gen mechanical?
No, actually, we would anticipate improving that with the mechanical within, each one of these is more of a comprehensive look in the infrastructure, so each one of those numbers includes HVAC, LED lighting, those types of things. So you would achieve that in that first level. The next gen would be departmental reorganization, changing the science lab sizes, changing the classroom sizes, creating small group instruction, those types of things. So look at it this way: if you said we want to have a comfortable, warm, safe, and dry and secure learning environment for our students, and you would do the infrastructure improvements and the envelope, you would achieve that. But then, well, wait a second, what happened because we wanted to do science differently, we wanted these flexible learning spaces, we wanted to do some other things as well. That's when you would move into that next category and start to prioritize and consider what you would do there. And that would be a closer analysis, for instance, on the third floor. Would you keep all those individual classrooms, the small classrooms, or would you begin to open up walls and do things? That would be where the next gen would come in.
But regarding energy savings with that first level, just updating the HVAC, updating windows, updating LED, there's a way to estimate
Yes,
cost savings there, which should start
right.
appearing fairly quickly, right?
Yeah, no, there's no question that they certainly would be more efficient systems, and you would definitely enjoy energy savings, no question about it.
I have a question about the historical preservation, the
Yes.
historical part.
Mhm.
Do we have to worry about IDEM, which is Indiana Department of Environmental Management, with regarding to the historical preservation part of the building?
Well,
Do
so.
you have to come in and
so-
say what you can and can't do?
So the high school is on the register, okay?
I thought about
And so that's why we did this study that Mr. Kinley did. So we have a really, and Jim's still around, so if we were to go to the next level and ultimately go and say, okay, so we're gonna do preservation or change to that, his study is the baseline that we would use to make sure that we did not jeopardize your register status. So yeah, whatever we did, that's why we went through that process, so we'd know to stay away from the key.
Does IDEM have to come in and inspect that?
Actually, it's not IDEM as much as it would be the,
Historical Society.
yeah, Historical Society, right,
It mostly has to do with exterior.
right. And Department of the Interior, actually, at the federal level. But again, the last thing we would want to do is be a part of jeopardizing register status. So, yeah, Jim has identified those key components that we recognize.
Thank you.
I had another question. I was a little concerned there was no references to any exterior modifications such as the bus drop-off. There's been discussions of a field house, turf fields for the practice fields. I mean, do we just add that ourselves, or is that out of your scope?
We'd be glad to discuss that. That in the community meetings in general, that didn't, or in the meetings that we talked about on site with staff, that didn't seem to rise to the level that these other things did. I'm not suggesting they aren't important, but they were not identified as things that we should be considering, specifically to the athletic fields. There were some comments on bus drop-off and reconfiguration, and that's certainly something that we could look
I
at.
think would have to be a must-do personally, but I'm just one.
Sure.
Athletic fields, I think it's a nice, would be a nice addition, but, and then, this is a little in the meat, but the security, and you may not know off the top of your hands, but the security issues at Civic Hall and McGuire Hall. Is it because of the double glass door? I mean, do you know specifically why those two were given red? They're both labeled red.
Yeah, I can't answer that, other than the fact that I would guess that maybe for a number of reasons, once inside the building, they weren't zoned from the rest of the building for some reason. That may be, and it may be relatively easy to fix. I'd defer to one of my colleagues and answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
In a complex of this size over time, it's not unusual to find that there are short circuits. It's happened, and particularly because of the age of the building. At that time, we didn't have some of the incidents today, so we weren't as sensitized to that. So in any major initiative, one of the things we would do is we would sort of overlay that zoning concept and rethink entirely access into the building, how people get in and out of the building, and those different levels of security within the building. So think about it in terms of a sort of concentric rings. And so that would be overlaid. So whatever we would do, that would be incorporated into that process. Again, at this sort of high level, we're applying general square foot costs with the anticipation that those things would be addressed, certainly.
Well, I know Aaron, I think Aaron was with me in one conference we were in at SBA.
Yes.
Talking about making sure you find the weak areas of exiting out the buildings or into the buildings. And usually the kids are the best at letting you know where those are.
Right.
But that you should take that into account.
Right. So typically, most of our exterior doors and even in some cases windows are all monitored, so we know whether they're open or not, so that you can monitor those from multiple locations or on the web. Interestingly enough, by the way, concurrent with IPAS fall conference this year, there's another conference that's happening in Indianapolis, and it's I wish I could tell you. Terry Spradlin was telling me about this just this last weekend. But a very well-known security consultant who we have used, Michael Dorn, who you may see him writing in one of the journals regularly, is going to be the keynote speaker there. And so there's a discussion about finding some confluence between the two conferences that are going on. Their conference is first responders and security officials and so forth. So this might be a great opportunity for more learning for all of us.
I know, again, maybe getting into the too much into this tonight, but in your infrastructure in the corridors and level 1 and level 2, one thing about the high school is the doors and locks are a nightmare. There's 3 different sets of keys that are used there. You know what I'm talking about. You got crazy amount of keys that have to go there. Some of the older doors, I mean, are we looking at going to uniform doors through the entire building with electronic locks and anything like that, or?
Well, definitely infrastructure would contemplate consideration for doors, locking, hardware. Again, that's not unusual and a nightmare when you have multiple keying systems for a complex of that size. So this would certainly contemplate improvements to those. Now, whether you would have electronic hardware on individual classroom doors, we'd go through that in a detailed discussion. But certainly from the exterior perimeter, even still now, the mantra of one way in, many ways out is still one of the keys. And that's based upon safe egress of students and staff in the event of a fire or some other type of. Yeah, based on our experience and what we see in Richmond High School, we believe that at this point, this would be adequate to address many of the issues and concerns that you have. And again, without going into detailed design, but knowing what we've been able to do with other comprehensive high schools, both historic and non-historic, we believe we're in the right ballpark here. And all these things are extremely important and would be addressed. But again, we wanted to sort of break it out to show some levels for consideration.
You had referenced earlier, like you did with the PK through 8 buildings, of easily put together a plan of 2 to 5 years, and you had referenced the roofing. You said some phasing in, I mean, one thing about it is I want to make sure that if we spend any money underneath, I want to make sure the roof above it is.
Yes.
But, we can't, this is gonna be a long project if this takes place. This is not, I mean, phasing all, I mean, we don't have other places to send our students at the high school.
Right.
So, are we, if we are looking at a comprehensive construction project like this at the high school, should we look at 5 years for the whole process to take place? 6 months? I mean, I know 6 months is out. But, I mean,
Wishful thinking, that'd be awesome.
I mean, just so we can also think about that, because there's areas of, there's areas at the high school that just have kids in them every day of the week,
Certainly.
even through the summer.
I would say probably a minimum of 3 years. And if we span summer months, which get shorter and shorter, but if we span summer months correctly and make maximum use of that, that will help. But you're exactly right. We're going to have to find a way, we will find a way where you phase and you do work and you occupy and you move students there and free up some space. You do that and move through the building in a logical fashion.
So you're thinking probably that realistically then, a complete renovation of the high school would be a 3 to 5 year process?
I'm thinking optimistically 3 years for the construction in total, and then for something of this nature, a year for design.
Just a quick question on roofing. Is it considered best practice to follow warranty rather than inspection replacement schedule? I mean, you mentioned, if they're out of warranty, we would look at replacing. I mean, is that what's typically done now?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that you can do. Ultimately, best practice would be if you're out of warranty and you can afford to do it, replacing it in total would probably be the optimum condition.
In that situation.
Okay, so if you don't do that, then one is you can, the word just escaped me, not refurbish, but you can resurface and warranty an existing roof under certain conditions, so that's an option. Number two, which would be a lesser than that, is you can continue to inspect, repair, and deal with what you have there. You're probably not going to have a catastrophic failure, but you may continue to have minor failures over time, or you replace.
Maybe Rob, what is it mostly asphalt or rubber over there?
We have some rubber, but we have what's called blue chip over there, so it's kind of asphalt, and then we have some shingles
Yeah.
and rubber, so.
So when you mentioned insulation, is that moving to rubber then? Because some of the quotes were plus insulation is, typically insulation goes when you replace asphalt with rubber.
Doesn't always have to, so what you would do is a thermal imaging, and if your insulation is not wet, it's still in decent shape, you may be able to strip the membrane and maybe add to it to bring it up to current day energy code, so that would be a possibility. Or if it has gotten wet over time, then you would definitely want to take that out.
And is there a way to get a priority list? Like
Yeah.
what has to be done?
That's an excellent question. Next steps.
Okay.
And we can go back, okay? I'm not cutting you off. We can go back and discuss any part of this. But what I was going to suggest, from our perspective, from our experience, is number one, revisit the capacity analysis and make sure there's a desire to maintain your current facility inventory. We've sort of heard that to an extent, but I think that's something you want to take a look at and make sure that's where you want to be. Maintain your building, your facility inventory that you have at this point in time. Having done that, then I think we want to confirm, maintain, and again, I've heard probably at this point, maintain your current grade configuration. The only reason I say that is if you were to move grades around between buildings, for whatever reason, that could have an impact then on the numbers of students in buildings. That may change the dynamic. Like I I said, with the exception of Charles, we have excess capacity. But if you start moving kids around, then that may change that balance and may have an impact that would cause us to contemplate more work in one of the buildings. So I think those are the first two things that you would do. Then, as you're saying, prioritize the items that will deliver the greatest response to your educational vision, programming, and operations. So, and you have the infrastructure improvements, which seem to be sort of I'm suggesting might be a baseline, but you could look within there. You might phase some of the roofing replacement over a period of time. There may be some other things that don't absolutely have to happen right now, so you could phase those. Then you take a look at those next gen items and say, okay, where's our best bang for the buck? What are the things that we absolutely want to do that we think are most responsive to what we heard from the community? What are some of those other things that maybe we don't need to do? So find that out, and so maybe there's a series of priorities that lead up to the overall number. And at that point in time, analyze the financial impact and funding options available. And so that's a point where you have a financial advisor and counsel that advise you on the process and the avenues or the roads that you can go to finance or pay for something like this. At that point in time, now you've pretty much got everything, and you can make a decision on what option you pursue, the path, and the schedule for approvals.
Goodness.
So that's slide 24, that's it?
Yeah. Yes.
I'm behind, okay. He's so riveting, I'm listening to every word he says. Well, that sounded good, didn't it?
Can I quote you on that? I'm sorry.
Other questions you might have for Bill? I appreciate your work on this. You guys have done a great job of compilating all of this information together, in my opinion, into something that's only, how many slides, Jeff? 24? Yeah, that's pretty amazing when you look at the amount of stuff and information that's on our website, so we appreciate that.
Yeah, I tried to summarize it as best as I could. There's more there, but yeah, it's really been an enjoyable process. I think you all have, there's no question you have the right vision in mind, and that's for your students, and that's wonderful. You have incredible programs. I mean, just listening to all the programming that goes on as we went through that process in those community meetings, it's amazing. What a depth of services that you're providing to your community, and so hopefully what we're providing here is the beginning of a roadmap to make sure that your facilities meet the needs of all that programming. So thank you.
One of the things at dinner one night when we were in San Antonio that I mentioned to the board members who were able to attend that, I felt like every session that I went into was more of an affirmation of the fact of what we're doing here. And I truly felt like I could have brought this group and we could have presented on that. I could have brought this group and we could have presented on that. So I think programmatically we are right on where we need to be. We need to refine some things, we need to refocus some things, and still find that next thing as far as what our students need as they move forward. What I would suggest and entertain from all of you, how do we move forward? What's the next thing? And I hear that when we've heard that in all our community meetings we've been at. I've heard that in all of the lunches that I've been at in the buildings when I talk with teachers and staff members. So what's next? What's going to happen next? When can we know what are we going to do next, if we're going to close buildings or not? If we're going to change grade configuration, if we're going to remodel, where do we go from that? I would like to bring to you at the next board meeting a recommendation for myself for that to be the jumping off point. Not that that'll be the final of where we end up, but that could be the jumping off point to put us in that position for next year, so that we can start to look at things that need to happen before the next school year. I know Mr. Weber, one of the things he asked about was what are the capital improvements we're going to be working on this summer. Well, some of that's going to depend on what all of you decide is going to be our direction for the next school year. But if we don't have a starting point for that, we're not gonna get there, and we need to get there. So that's how I would like to proceed with that. Excuse me. And I think a part of that will be, in our board reports was a report on school boundaries. One of the things that we're currently looking at is looking at elementary boundaries and how do we get our elementary schools at 85% capacity, all of them, so that we don't have this overcrowding in certain buildings. And the next level of that is to look at what do we do in our intermediate buildings and start to do that. And that could all be included as a part of that recommendation at the next board meeting. Comments or questions on that?
Well, and weren't we on some timelines about funding?
We are.
I mean, where are we with that?
So we've moved forward, as you all know, in hiring our financial advisor and working with them. Yesterday at the IASBO meeting, Karen had a chance to talk with a couple of individuals there and give us some guidance there. And so we're getting ready to take that next step with them as well to meet and talk through where do we need to get all of you. What's that timeline need to look like? So we're aware of what we've got to accomplish, and we're in the stages of preparing what that needs that needs to look like.
Well, and I think sometime soon or whenever, maybe we need to have a special board meeting just on this, you know, without having to think about other things, that we concentrate solely on this.
But our goal for the financing is to be on the ballot next fall, right?
Well, I think it depends. Go ahead, Karen.
As far as I know, we don't have anything determined yet. The goal was to, from what I've heard from you, is to keep the tax rate steady for right now so that you have time to make those decisions and to know where you want to be, if that is the direction in which the board wants to go. So what I am looking at as a timeline financially for the corporation, in order to keep that tax rate steady, we have to make some short-term decisions. I would say probably just for everyone involved, not later than late summer, early fall, just so that there is time to know what's going on. The budget process is going to look extremely different for all of us this year, and that's going to add some stress to that timeline. So I want to make sure that we have the ample time to make those documents and the things that need to happen done right and well. So I think that's where I've heard you talking about going. If I'm wrong, please correct me, but I think that with Mr. Terrell's recommendation, it will probably provide you with that jumping off point to at least make some of those short-term decisions that help us move through the summer and get some of that work started. I do expect the meeting with the financial advisor and with Ms. Herndon is going to help us also to help get you the information you need to make those decisions, perhaps sooner than you even expect, you know, that process to look like as we talk about fall. Maybe it's earlier than that. So that's just what I understand. If I'm wrong, please let me know, because that's where I'm headed.
Well, there's
when
two different.
We're working on this.
There's two different things. I mean, if we have to go to the voters, and that's when it has to go to the ballot, that's when the timing of that has to take
Right.
place. Now, depending on whether types of financing we do, it may not have to.
Right.
So I understand that, but I do think one of the things that this board needs to wrap their head around is, because to me, I realize that yes, we're gonna need to go into debt, and we're gonna need to do some work. I understand that. But I need to wrap my head around, I think there's 3 or 4 or 5 different pathways of going about financing that. So, you know, I'm kind of interested in like a 5-year or a 10-year, a 5-year, a 3-year. Like the 1-year plan, we shouldn't even be talking about it. I mean, we should already be doing it. So, and with our debt falling off, those options really do become better for us but then with the fact that they're changing the way they're doing the financing from our traditional capitals and transportation and bus to operational and educational, that's one of our pathways of, because we're gonna be picking up additional funding because in January of 2020, our neutral liability bond goes away, tax neutral.
Right. it's-
So where we've
yeah.
been crushing the capital budget for the last 12 years, now
Right.
becomes available.
Right. It's not additional funding, it's just
Well,
moving to a different
it's
fund.
a-
But yes, yes, it becomes a different
It's additional funding that we've not had.
Right, in that fund.
So there's some, I need to get my head around that financial structure and that change, because I think that plays into it. I think educationally, we still got some discussion. If we wanna bring in more hands-on classes, and I'm not saying like at the old wood shop and metal shop type thought process in the intermediate schools, but if we wanna push some of those hands-on,
Career pathway.
thank you, that's the word I was
Mission,
looking for.
basically, is what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
I mean, we went away from that type of a setup when we renovated Test and Dennis because, so now, are we gonna need that space to bring those back? And then will that force us to take a look at moving the fifth graders? Or, I have no clue. I mean, these are all the conversations which would have a bearing on everything he said, because if we're gonna go back in and set up more labs in the intermediate schools, then that's a whole different, that changes our timeline, that changes where we get work done first, that changes everything.
So the question I have is, as you're talking about bringing a recommendation, the recommendation you're talking about is sort of next steps? Okay,
What the recommendation I'm talking about would be to give us an action plan for right now so that we're ready when the doors open in the fall.
Gotcha.
What does that look like
to
to
get
move?
us to.
But then
gotcha.
also includes those bigger pieces of that's this part. The other part is what's the bigger outlook as far as debt that's falling off, as far as what are we gonna do at the high school, as far as can we do additional classes like you're talking about within the financial restraints that we have. I think all of those pieces have to come together.
So what kinds of things, what do you need from us that you haven't heard yet? And in order to be able to do that? Understanding that that's not the end-all be-all, but that's at least to get us.
When you start from a November 19 referendum and work backward, I mean, I don't see how you're ready in 7 months, so that pushes it to 19. So, I mean, then that point, I mean, so you,
I'm assuming that's probably what he's done.
That'll be part of
so
it,
you
yeah.
have your plan has to be ready in time to have committees and marketing and steering group. So, I mean, I guess if that's
That's
the
assuming
target,
that we need to do that. The referendum in 19. Right.
but we have $100 million worth of improvements,
Right.
and we have $20 million.
Yeah.
Well,
available.
and maybe where I would start looking, because we know that the immediate decision that has to be made is what happens with our debt next year. What do you want to do with our debt next year? We don't have to talk referendum at that point. We don't have to talk anything except what do you want our debt to look like next year? Is that a short-term debt? Is that a long-term debt? And that way we can plan what then that means, because what I would assume we're going to have a conversation on is knowing that if we want long-term, then it turns into, do we talk referendum now or do we talk it later? Do we even talk it? Do we talk petition remonstrance? And that's part of why that financial advisor is there to help guide us on our best option. But what I know is that even before we have that conversation, we have to determine what next year looks like. I have to turn the budget in in August, September
I think it looks like
timeframe.
this year for the most part.
But we have to make decisions in order for that to happen.
What decision needs to be made?
And
You
to
have-
keep the
you have to
taxes
take a bond.
steady.
You have to take a bond out this year in order to do that, so you have to
There's
determine.
literally not enough time to make major changes.
No, but you can determine what projects you'd like to bond. That's what we have to do.
Right
So we
away,
have to determine what,
Which we should already be doing, hence the one-year
Which
plan,
we
the
have.
three-year plan, the five-year plan.
right, we have a list, which is where that recommendation is gonna come with those priorities of what Mr. Terrell thinks we need to do right now.
Those could be
What we
ticked
need
off
to do to get us to the school year, what we need to do for that bonding project. And it isn't gonna be completely comprehensive next meeting, because we're talking about what we have to get done for the start of school year. And what that will mean is what we have to get done for the budget so that we can approve it in the proper time frame. So the conversation is actually going to be steps.
Keep
And I
us
think-
in the best position to
Right.
all our options open.
And there's a number of projects that, I mean, that is a large amount of money, but there's a number of projects that
That are
provide
already-
us flexibility in choosing what we do first. And that is all gonna come to you as a part of that, so that we can make that next step, whether that's a 3-year, whether that's a 5-year, whether that's a 1-year or a 2-year. Schools do it all different ways. And it could be, you might decide that you want 2 years to make your decision, so we're gonna take a 3-year bond so that you have the time to get that next step on. As Mr. Slifer said, there are so many options available to schools that we're gonna be able to look at things we've not been able to look for before and to this point. And with that additional money transferring back into the CPF plan, it's gonna help a lot. So we do have a lot to talk about, but I think that the immediate need is determining if you wanna take short-term debt, what that looks like and how many years. If you want to do that, what kind of projects can we do during that period, and what kind of cost to maintain that rate are we looking at in order to get all those things done? From the financial end, that's where we need to be headed, and I think that the plan at the next meeting is gonna move that way so that we can get the things done that we need to get done this year in preparation for that long-term plan that you guys are talking big picture.
But we're gonna be doing that, maybe the wrong term to use is recommendation. Maybe you should be saying, here's my thoughts. Well, because a recommendation forces action.
But some
we
of it's
need
gonna
action.
require
Well,
action.
but I hear what you're saying, but you're wanting to have a well, do we wanna dismiss? I mean, we don't need him standing.
It's actually very instructional to me, so.
But, well, what I mean, I wanna be
You're welcome to
respectful,
sit.
respectful of him.
I will do that.
And thank you.
Yeah.
But, and I guess we're behind the curveball because you guys evidently are ahead of us in what your thoughts are, and we're not there. But, as I sit here and look at these different, we're gonna have a recommendation, and yet we've not had our first meeting with a financial advisor.
I don't think it's a recommendation like
Well,
you're
that's why I
thinking like
used the
a
term.
recommendation, but it's,
But, yeah, let me explain that a little bit more. So I think it still needs to be a recommendation because, and there could be parts of the recommendation that you decide, no, we're not gonna move forward with that, but we are with this. And so the recommendation is because there are things that we've got to get moving on for the next school year. We need to force action on so
Before,
that we can
could
do
you
that
just give
for
an
the next year.
example?
I'd rather not right now, because if I say anything
Fair
publicly
enough.
right now, that's gonna be gospel.
I
And,
understand.
and you know where I'm
Point
going
made.
with that.
Yeah.
And so, that's why I'd rather be able to get that information to you in time for you to be able to look at it and think through that process of what that looks like. So there are gonna be parts of it, yes, it is gonna force action that we need to take at the next board meeting. There's gonna be other parts of that recommendation that are moving forward. And are there parts that we're ahead of you guys on? I hope so. This is what we live, this is what you pay us to do, so we better be ahead of you.
But
Have
again,
we-
there should
have we
also,
de-
again, there should also be conversation with the board,
Absolutely.
so they're brought
Have we
along.
determined what direction that's gonna be? No. Where we are with that is making sure that we have fully explored all of the different options that are out there so that we can bring them to you and say, here's the buffet. Tell us what you want more information on. What do you want to sample at the ice cream shop store? So here's a sample of it. Let us know if you want more of it. So what we're doing right now is our due diligence to study, to make sure that we've talked with the right people, that we can begin arranging the timeline for meetings with the right people, excuse me, so that then we're in the position we need to be. So whether it's 2019, whether it's a referendum, whether it's a remonstrance, whether it's bond, you guys have been exposed to all of that. So at the end of this is, you guys have moved, you guys have owned this decision. This is the direction we're going with.
I guess we'll wait. I mean, I like to think on things. I don't like, I've been in this situation too many times that we have an action come before the board and we're out of time and we get 2 weeks to make a decision. If that's the route that's coming, my vote's no right now. It's that simple.
That's fine.
Because that isn't fair for us. I understand you doing your due diligence. I understand you doing your jobs. I understand, and I'm not trying to take anything away from that. But we also have our due diligence that we need to perform.
Absolutely.
We also have our jobs and when you take the time away from us to do that, then the hairs go up on the back of my neck.
And rightly
So what other things specifically?
Well, I don't know, because I'm trying
Yeah,
to guess
I mean,
at what
That's
he's
what I'm
at,
saying.
where
In
he's
order-
at.
in order
No
for
idea
us-
where the administration is at.
Well, that's why he has to come to us
But-
next
So he's gonna come in 2 weeks and we're supposed to make a decision to,
No.
okay,
Not
I'm
on
interested in that.
everything.
No.
But
John,
on some things,
but I'm gonna get you the information so that you can have it beforehand, to ask questions beforehand as we go into
like the
this.
Friday before in the update, I mean,
You guys tell me when you would like it, and I
Tomorrow.
will do, well, no, I cannot.
I mean,
have it
literally,
tomorrow.
I cannot read something
But John,
Friday
here-
and make a decision Wednesday. I'm sorry if that doesn't work for you.
Here's the problem with the situation that we're in. Some of the stuff that we need to have these conversations of, because we have to do it in public, we have to make sure that everything happens in the right timing and in an appropriate manner. To just shoot from the hip right now and give you, do I have an idea of what the recommendation is gonna be? Sure I do. Is it polished enough to present to all of you tonight and go out there? Absolutely not.
Well, sometime we're going to have to sit down and allow him to do that so that we can have information. And then once you get your information, you can make your comments and questions then if you don't disagree or agree. But I agree that he shouldn't just blurt out what his ideas are, and giving him a day or two to do that is no, I don't think that's fair.
The point
So-
is, I am surprised that we're talking about already having major decisions in the next 2 meetings, when I literally do not know what those might be.
But I think therein, when you say major decisions, you're automatically assuming that some part of that recommendation is gonna involve major changes for next year. And again, that's, give me the opportunity.
I don't know.
To present, that's right. So don't assume that it's going to be.
Exactly.
I'm not assuming anything, because I literally do not know.
That's why you gotta wait and see. So can
Well,
we agree
I'm
that we're gonna
saying,
wait and see what
maybe than
happens?
being surprised with a short notice to make a choice, at some point, we should be clued in on the process.
Well, that's what,
That's
it
what
may
I'm
not
trying
be
to
the
bring.
way, the direction you like to see it, but that's exactly what he's doing.
I'm fine, so,
Good.
thank you.
Yeah, I think that I knew, at least, maybe not everyone knew, but at some point we would get to this crossroads, because there are always some places, we knew there were gonna be some things that needed to be, decisions that need to be made to do or not do short-term, because we have a school year coming up. Brad's asked about a couple of them. And we've got some immediate issues that can't wait for 2 years, while we decide to do major. So this is where I think we are. We're at this place now where we have to, and then as part of that conversation, I think then we, as a group, have to decide what our baselines are. For example, do we all agree that we want to keep a level tax rate? Do we all agree that we would like to take most of this on? Do we all agree that we're not changing grade configurations? Do we all agree? We have to get to that place. In the meantime, though, we're screaming up on some deadlines, of some things that have, if we have to decide whether we are or are not for fall. And I think that's where he's trying to guide us to the next step. At least this is what I'm hearing. You're trying to guide us to the next step and still address those things that sort of either have to be dealt with or not dealt with. And if we say we're not willing to make decision X for next year, then they have to decide how they're going to address the immediate issue that creates. You see what I'm saying? Such as boundaries, I'll just say it. There are schools that are too full. If they decide to tweak and recommend that we tweak a boundary here and there, that's something that, while yes, it plays a part in our master plan, it's probably something that should not wait until we are all ready.
Well, I just.
Those are the kinds of things that I expect.
And it may be, I'm gonna speak for myself. I may be defensive, but I'm also, I'm defensive for the right reasons, the taxpayers, the students, the community.
Understood.
And it may have been the perception of the
word recommendation.
The wording is, we're gonna have a recommendation in 2 weeks and you have to make a decision then. That's what I heard. Now, not on all of it, but parts of it. So now we're hearing, I guess I didn't come to this meeting thinking that our next board meeting, we were going to have a recommendation to start making some decisions. Now maybe that's my fault. But one of the things that I think I will be adamant on, and I will push, that I don't know how the size of the discussion next week or the recommendation or where we're coming. I mean, I always feel the board should never be surprised. The administrators don't want to be surprised.
I think everyone would agree with that.
And it may not be anything of any substance next week that we can't deal with, but it's our concern. But I do believe that as we move forward in this master plan and we start to create the footprint, if this board isn't 7-0 going forward, and when we go out in the public, and if it has to hit a referendum, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
I would agree with
So I just want to make sure that each board member here needs to be respective of each other's thoughts, because it's going to take all 7 of us to go out in the community and say, hey, we want to put this master plan together, and the proposal tonight total just in what he presented is $100 million.
Absolutely.
There's a number that's going to go right through the paper and the news.
Of course.
Well, there was probably another 50 or 75 million we could have added to it tonight.
Without trying very hard.
Athletic fields, bus drop-off, the list could go on and on and on. So, could you see us going out in the community and asking to borrow $100 million and we'd be 5-2, 6-1, 4-3?
You're absolutely right about that.
We're wasting our money having all these consultants come in because it'll never pass. So we just need to be respectful of the timing, the information. Every board member needs to be brought along, coddled, wrapped in a diaper if that's what they need. So,
Yeah. Like I said, I just think we're unfortunately, I guess, we can't stop action.
Again, it's on you.
We can't stop action until we're ready. Unfortunately, we have a school year to deal with next year, and I think that that's what you're talking about.
well, and I think
so
I think we understand each other better now that
Yeah,
we've had this discussion.
Yeah, because and again, there may be some of those thoughts, and I know I would assume, I can't say I know, I would assume that based on all the conversations, you're trying to think, okay, what's the best course of action short term to take care of fall, because we got to do something about fall right now. So that's what I'm thinking.
Well, that's what's, and again, I'll take part of the blame, maybe I'm not understanding this, but I came to this board meeting not realizing that there was any decisions we had to make by the start of school. I was thinking the financing
I did
and
not
the
know
debt
there was
rolling off,
urgency.
that we
Yeah.
were okay until next year.
Okay,
So-
so you didn't hear that there are schools that are overcrowded?
Well,
Charles,
you know, I've heard
Charles.
that, but then the funny thing tonight, our consultant stands up and says
All
we
about
have
Charles.
one school building that's at capacity.
Right.
So, but my point is, again, keep in mind I'm talking from, I didn't come to this board meeting thinking that we had any action that we had to make. That's a surprise to me.
Okay. Well, and I didn't know that either, but that was in the back of my head, thinking, what are we going to do? Because we've got a couple buildings that are screaming just a little bit, and do we bear with that? Which, if you all recall, this has happened before, where we were like,
Now,
do we build, while we're building, do we put sheds out front? You know, I mean, unfortunately, all of these things don't always happen in the neatest, the best order, because we still have to do business starting in August.
So I guess this will be a good segue into the next discussion. then.
so a few years ago, Westview
Was empty.
was empty.
Mhm.
Now it's full. That's where I'm getting. I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Do you know how many
Got it in the
students of that over capacity we are at Charles? It 30 or 50 or?
You had all those, I mean, we had.
I know we all had it. I can't remember off the top of my
I
head.
don't remember either.
Okay. So with the outgoing class going from 4th grade to 5th grade, what's our enrollment look like coming in?
That's what the projections were. It was based on
I mean, are we?
next year.
And obviously, we have to look at trends and try to consider all of that.
Right,
as
I
well.
mean, because Westview did a heck of a swing in 3 years.
Yes, they did.
And this is the second one or third one that I'm aware of in that neighborhood. And if you look at those neighborhoods,
Right.
the size of
and
the homes,
That's what I'm saying, I
what's
mean,
going to happen forever.
Do we have to redistrict if we're, if it's close?
The only
it's-
one that has always sort of consistently, and one of those, I'll just say it, in the end, we probably wish we put the classrooms on at Charles that we had talked about putting on the last time we did a construction project. But, is Charles, that's been pretty consistent.
Okay.
Well, I have no more questions for Fannin and Hallie. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, it's so much information. That
Yeah.
is, it's super helpful.
Well, and I think it's like anything, you have to, even if you have to start taking baby steps to what you want to get to, you have to start somewhere. You can't keep kicking the can down the road.
Well, and if Karen and those folks are working on the deadlines that we have to be aware of,
Yeah.
that's going to be helpful in the context of the timelines. And as John said, which makes perfect sense, if you think that's your goal, which we really haven't decided that yet, any kind of a referendum, you go from there and work backwards, clearly. I mean, we get that. I know Todd gets that. But in the short term, we have to have classes on, starting in August, so,
Well, and we talked about, when we were talking about programming too, practically everything I went to was talking about, the pendulum swinging again. We need more career ed classes because that's where the jobs are gonna be. More skills, more this, more that, not particularly don't push everybody to college like we were doing for
Right.
so long. And there needs to be more areas of opportunity, so I don't know what that's gonna look like.
okay. Okay, I think we're all clear now. Now, that as soon as you're ready, and we can have information, on where you're thinking and what's necessary. I know. Okay, I have since lost my place.
Thank you.
and Thank you
Appreciate
so
your work.
much.
Fine, thank you.
6.01.
And I just wrapped that into what we just talked about.
That-
School boundaries, remember I mentioned to you that we're looked at elementary, now we're beginning to look at secondary boundaries, just as we try to look at capacity issues and Charles being over and trying to get all of our buildings to about 85% capacity.
Now, was there, you referenced that a few minutes ago. I don't remember reading anything about elementary boundaries at 85%. I remember.
That's just a number that we looked at to say with the current population we have of students and the number of buildings we have, if we were to balance it, what would it look like? And that number came out to, we could, with the number of elementary students we have, 85% we could do in each building.
Was that a report that went out?
No.
No, it's just,
Oh, you're just now telling me.
they're just trying to.
Okay.
Yes. No. This,
In the-
remember,
I am slow tonight.
one of the things that we talked about was that tonight we would be bringing you a very preliminary discussion about boundaries and what we are looking at and what we are hoping to bring back to you, again, next board meeting, as part of that recommendation,
Well,
looking at boundaries.
We did ask, you had asked, I know even, like, I'm not sure if I'm happy with this percent or that percent. You've said that to me too. I'm not sure if I'm happy with a high, being at 90 or whatever. And so I think that was, like I said, it was a jumping off point regarding balancing enrollment given our current structure.
So-
as I understand.
Is that am I allowed to ask questions on the boundary? You got more you want to say?
Absolutely no.
I didn't want to cut you
You're
off.
always allowed to ask questions. And you're,
Getting answers is a different thing, though, right?
I knew it was coming.
But he's allowed to
the ball.
tell you I don't have that information.
So we're tentatively looking at a boundary or a slight boundary adjustment for the fall.
we are looking at a boundary adjustment for the fall. I'm
So-
not gonna concur slightly or.
Well-
Or,
I just need to kind of have that qualified before my next roll of questions
Okay.
come. I mean, we have questions to ask about, to answer yet about grade configuration,
we do,
about curriculum,
We do.
about,
Sure do.
I mean, we're looking at possibly going out in a year's time into the community and say, can we increase your taxes, please? I mean, are we really at the point that we really have to adjust boundaries? Does board policy that we have in place for classroom size, if we have just one building that's over capacity, I mean, would using board policy and suffer through another year not maybe be a wise way?
again, I think that earlier you mentioned all of you doing your due diligence, which I think all of you have been doing for the last 12 months. And the things that we've all heard as we've gone through this process, all of that I expect for you when I bring a recommendation to you next board meeting to utilize that information that you've been hearing for the last 12 months to then make your decision. You can, as always, with any recommendation, is it a call for action? Yes. The call for action may be, we're good right now. Let's revisit that for the next school year.
Exactly.
Absolutely, and that would be fine. But in my personal opinion, from where we're at right now, we have to have that to start what's coming next.
That makes sense.
And that could be for next school year. That could be you guys saying, yeah, do just what we're doing. Everything just as we're doing, and we'll start it next school year. And that'll give us the time to do configurations. That'll give us the time to evaluate curriculum. That'll give us the time. By all means. But again, if I don't bring you that recommendation, people out there are going to continue to be thinking, well, my gosh, is my kid going to dentist? Is my kid going to test? Are we going to have 5th, 6th grade and a 7th and 8th grade building? Are we
Yeah, that's what
closing? Are we
that's what I
closing a
wanna
building?
eliminate.
Are we going to have Charles operating at 105% capacity again? Those are the things that we have to look at. And I think part of that comes down to an equity issue for our kids and knowing what resources are available in our different buildings and trying to make sure that it is as equitable as we possibly can make it for our kids because they deserve that. So I think that that's part of what you all can have the conversation over, and
That's why we'll have to consider whatever is brought to us in the
Yes.
context of all the information that we have, and then make that.
and truly, I want, when I bring the recommendation to you, I want you guys to decide what it is that we do going forward. I mean that wholeheartedly. You can, when you get it, you can say, we don't want to do any of this right now. And that will be fine. But again, we have to have that starting point.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I agree with that. Awesome. All right. We do have a couple of topics under other topics under board reports. One thing I did want to know is I wanted you all to give me a little bit of a legislative. We're sort of done, but we're not done.
I wish that I'd brought my paperwork in here with me from my meeting this morning. So there were many, it was amazing in a short session, the number of educational bills that were brought forward. Excuse me. One of the big ones that we're looking at going into this special session is going to be this safety bill. And I want to say 1062, but I don't know that that is correct. A few things that you all need to know about that. One is I talked with Senator Rotz last week, and I have a meeting with him Friday morning with the, I invited the county superintendents to come in as well, so they're going to be here with us. And one of the things that he has some issues that he wants to talk through with us, so that you guys understand, one of the things they're talking about is adding additional resources into school safety, which is welcome. We'll take everything we can get. Each year, there's a school safety grant, and schools from all across the state apply for it, and there are many, many, many things that go unfunded from that security grant. We had things the last several years that we didn't get funded in that security grant. One of the issues that I have with the way the bill is currently written is it's trying to create another layer of checks and balances, supervision, bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it, and take $1 million and put it into additional positions that are simply checks where people sit around and read security plans. We currently already have a process for checking our security plans. We have to submit them every year to the state. We have to review them within our buildings with our safety teams. We have to, Rob then reviews them at the corporate level to make sure that they align with ours. We then share them with our county emergency team that Rob meets with on a monthly basis. And then we submit all of that to the state for their review. This would take $1 million away from what could go to schools to help with security measures. And with that, excuse me, with that, then, thank you, would be less resources that would come to us. Another concern with that security bill that they're gonna meet on that one-day session is that it leaves charter and choice schools, which receive public dollars, out of it. They don't have to do anything that we have to do, which goes back to an overriding theme that I've had continuously with Senator Rotz and any other legislator that I can get to listen to me, and that is that personally I don't mind the competition at all of charter or choice schools, but they should have to play by the same rules. They should have to be as transparent as we are. They should have to show where their funds are going, and this does not, they don't have to do it.
The bureaucracy should be the same.
Yeah, and so if you're in the same city, why would you not have to? So anyway, that's a concern that I'm going to address there. Other things that we talked about with the legislative session was looking at, obviously, the funding that's going to go along with graduation pathways. There's additional record keeping that's going to have to take place. There's going to be additional partnerships. There's going to be additional possible teaching positions that are going to be created because of that. When it passed, they told us, oh, the funding it'll take care of itself. Don't worry, it'll be there. everything we're hearing now is
Trust me, I do
there's not
this
gonna
all the
be,
time.
They don't get anything.
there's not gonna be additional funding. But we're gonna keep pushing it and trying to bring it back around. One thing that's kind of a big deal is they have changed the age for entrance into kindergarten, and they've moved that from a September 1st date. So if you turned 5 by September 1, you would be fully funded as a kindergartner, whatever that means at whatever district you're at. There was a individual legislator who in his district was made aware of schools who were letting 4th grade or 4-year-olds in and getting the money for them and then retaining them in kindergarten for a second year. And so they were double dipping, he thought. Well, the concern is if those students weren't ready anyway, then it's better to retain them at kindergarten than it is, because by law, you're gonna have to retain them when they fail
Third
the
grade.
I-Read 3. And if they're not past kindergarten, chances are pretty high that, so instead of dealing with that situation, they just moved it all back to August 1st. So, if you're not 5 by August 1st, we will not be funded if we allow those students into kindergarten.
So
Well,
is that their answer to pre-K?
no, that's a whole nother animal. So that's a curveball. So we're waiting to see that they think that they may possibly revisit that in the special session as well. We're not sure where they're going to go with that. There's been some continued changes with diploma types. If you remember when we went to ESSA, they had done away with the general diploma, which could have impacted our graduation rate by about 12%, which is relatively low considering we're an urban school district. There were districts across the state who were going to take a 25 to 30 or more % hit. So that speaks well to our people and how they work with our kids anyway. But they were able to make the adjustments necessary there to help in that as well. That's just kind of a general overview. Dixie, I don't know if you have anything to add with that.
That's the main ones that I've seen.
Oh, the other one was sex ed.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, if you guys remember, the sex ed bill was about making students participating in any class that addressed anything that had to do with sex education, that it would have to be an opt-in rather than an opt-out. Our concern with that is many of our students at a very young age, from the Good Touch, No Touch programs and other programs that we make available to our students, they would not be able to do that. And a year ago now, we changed, in order to appeal your ISTEP score for your student, it used to be that parents had to sign that they wanted it, and they changed that now to make it so that we could go ahead as educators and make that decision for the parents if it's close. And the reason being was it's so hard to get that contact and information back and forth with our parents. And so we use that same argument with the sex ed bill. And so they actually moved in that direction. Ron Cross did a great job for us as well. Sometimes when they continually hear from superintendents, it's helpful if they hear from different groups as well. And so Ron was representing an attorney group, and we talked back and forth, and he worked with Jeff Rotz before he went in to the education committee, and they made it so that it's going to be opt-out rather than opt-in. But you have to give 2 different windows, so you have to give the parents 20-day window. So I would send it out to Suzanne and say, hey, your daughter Dixie is going to be in 4th grade, and they're going to be talking about this particular topic beginning in October, or whatever it may be. Suzanne then can either send a letter back saying, I don't want Dixie to participate. If she doesn't do anything, we have to send her another 10-day window, one more time. Hey, remember, Dixie's going to be participating. We need to hear from you. If we don't hear after that 10-day window, then we're good to go. So instead of it being active, it went to passive, but there's 2 different windows of opportunity.
The only way to deliver that is by postal mail.
Well, no. So one of the things that we talked about today at our Urban Schools Association meeting was including that in like your registration packets.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. And so it would be like a universal sign-off sheet that you'd have. One additional would be, if you don't want your student to participate in sex ed, sign and return to the office.
Which would be better for everybody involved.
Yes. Yeah. And then, so then that, whatever that due date is, say it's the first day of school, and that's August 15th, then you'd have to give 20 days, and then you'd have to do the next one, and most likely that would have to be by mail. We're still waiting on the interpretation to come out of the legislative session to tell us what are the requirements for that. My guess is they're probably not going to be organized enough at this point in time to tell us what it is for this year, and then
Well,
see
and
what
doesn't the teacher have to prepare alternate assignments?
Yes, and that's the case now. I mean, and that was
That's
part of
double work.
part of my conversation though with Rotz and Dick Ham at IU East was that's already in place. So any subject matter or lesson that it goes against what you personally believe in, for instance, if you remember years ago, it was Harry Potter was the big thing, and people were doing lessons on Harry Potter. Well, if I didn't want my daughter to do Harry Potter, I could write in and say she's not participating in a Harry Potter
Yeah, we
lesson.
had the Freedom Writers, that was part of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
was.
then
Well, and
and so they'd
band-
have to provide an alternative
Any
lesson
banned
for 'em.
books,
So,
I mean,
yeah.
because we've done them.
So yes, it is an additional lesson, but at the same time, yeah,
That could happen almost
it
any
could happen
time,
anytime.
really.
It's already there. So again, it was I think it was a reaction to some of the social issues we're seeing right now, and some of the perceived materials that they say are being taught and given out in schools that may or may not really be happening. And so we feel good that it could have been a lot worse.
In the interest of time, the other topic that I had on board reports is we really sort of took a sigh of relief about policy because we had gone through that big, but now I think we need to readdress that regarding going forward and our overtime update policies or procedures, I guess, not policies, but procedures regarding reviewing of policies and keeping on, is it did we say 5 years? 3 years, 5 years?
3-year rotation.
3-year rotation. So there's the 3-year rotation issue, and then there's the, is there obviously there's some of these updates that are ongoing legal wording in nature, and then there's others that I know a couple people have a policy or two here or there that they would like brought back for review. So I was kind of looking for your input, and then I thought on how best to proceed. We have the structure. We have people assigned to different sections, but and then I thought maybe just to sort of put that down in writing for everyone's review and saying, is this kind of what we all think the procedure should look like? Does that make sense? So any thoughts about that other than the part we already know, which is people were assigned to different sections? The question is, Dixie, and you started this, so I'm going to refer to you. Was our thought, I say our thought process, but as we were talking about that, were we thinking, okay, we're going to go do the 1s, then we're going to do the 2s?
Yeah, because really, I think the 1s and 2s are the ones that haven't been looked at in quite some time. You probably need to look at the dates. Like, I know the
that makes
3s and
sense, the
4s
dates
were
makes
merged, and Brad and I and Jennifer, I mean, those are all finished, current as of right now. So they don't need to be looked at until year 4, probably. But 1, 2.
So looking at the dates,
But every board policy we had was reviewed by the attorney.
Yes.
right.
So technically,
We're legally up to date.
so the latest date on every one of those policies it's gonna be a current date.
About 6 months ago, is that about?
Yeah, I mean, that's why,
But we did not, well, I guess that's my question, because their dates,
Not every single one. They were updated with legally. But there's some policies in there that are local.
We only looked at the ones on her list.
Yeah,
that's,
that weren't done.
thank you, John, that was the wording I couldn't get to. They didn't touch every one. They reviewed them all, but they didn't do something to all of
So
them.
they may meet state guidelines, but we may have different thoughts.
It's, our bylaws, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a working document.
Correct.
They're continually updated, continually revisited, situations change, all kinds of different thought processes change, everything else, and so that's why they need to be updated continuously.
But we don't want to get in a situation where, and we're required to review them. And so our thought was, while there will be individual policies that will be brought in for those reasons, there also sort of needs to be a rotation for review.
Yes.
Just
And
to
so we
review.
should, what we'll need to do is look into see which ones have not, did not, I guess, is that the best way to go about it? I'm asking you guys, because I want to get us on this rotation so that we don't lose track of that, because we did so much work this last time to get them legally up to date. I want to get us on the rotation so that when there is an individual policy that someone says, hey, I'd like, I'd like to review that one, what's the will of the board, or then it can be reviewed by the people who are assigned to that first, maybe? Is that the procedure?
Well, that's part of the question I was asking
Exactly.
earlier, because, the administrators are bringing back
Right,
policy.
and those were definitely language.
Well, but still,
but-
is the intent for that to roll through the policy committee
I
of the
think,
board members
I
first?
think that's a very good question.
I think with that as well, Jeff, so one of the things that you decided as a board was to go away from Neola, and we used to use their quarterly updates to drive which ones needed to be reviewed right now. Now we're using ISBA's attorneys as they put out information, and so as those come out, obviously those are gonna rise to the top and have issues that have to be addressed immediately as well.
And so the question is, as a board, do we want to, when those come through ISBA, do they go to the group of people who are assigned to that
Correct.
section first? Hey, you guys look at it, here's the updates, and then they come.
So it almost sounds like it needs to be broken down further. It almost sounds like whatever section, let's say you and I are assigned 1,000,
Mm-hmm.
then it sounds like we should take 1,000s and divide it up into thirds. And our goal is every quarter, have 25% of that reviewed. And at any time that a 1,000 comes before the board that needs added, updated, modified from the administration, it goes through to that committee, and then we have regular quarterly reports. So our 3-year review is actually just, everybody is doing a 3-year review in their section.
That makes sense. So each section could be divided up into quarters, and then that way it
I mean,
wouldn't,
not to
yeah,
put
that makes sense.
anything on Kim, but, if we could just be given a list of policies we need to review by the next, if I get it at the beginning of the quarter,
But I
That's
think,
what I'm saying, is if we put the plan together, we'll have that whole
because with
list.
Dixie's list, it was easy to go through.
Check them off.
And check and look.
So to your point, I think what we could do is,
Kim loves policy work,
Kim handles it amazingly efficiently. So,
She does.
Kim could simply divide those up and then send them to the people who are assigned and say, hey, these are the ones that need to be reviewed by, and just go 3
because
months
they
out.
appeared in the ISB updates.
Well, no.
Oh, just
because
general.
like what Jeff's recommending is that we look at all of them, a
Ongoing
third,
review.
a third,
Yep,
a
yep,
third,
yep.
right?
Yeah,
For the 4 quarters.
so we're always reviewing them,
And so that she just keeps it,
and then every quarter, that committee will have a
or
report.
should it be a 4th every quarter?
You could almost include it in the
So that way you're
update.
doing it once a year.
Oh, yeah, that could.
However you wanna do it. Yeah,
At the end
or
of the
a
update.
So that
third
way-
every 4 months, however you wanna
Sure.
do it.
So that way, you guys have that then, and you guys could say, you know what, we reviewed it. You and Suzanne reviewed it, and there's nothing.
There's no.
And then in the meantime, if there's something that comes up, that we get a memo from Julie
Yes.
Slavens that says, hey, this needs to be addressed, then we would automatically send it to the
That
1,000
committee.
group
Yep,
to
that
look at,
works.
to bring to the next board meeting or the board meeting after.
And at any given time, any board member or administrator wants to bring up a policy,
Correct.
So,
it could be thrown in.
my question on that, if we're talking about chain of command here, basically, if I wanted to bring up policy 1,000 and you two are the committee, do I bring it before the board or do I bring it to you two first?
Well, I think technically if we're gonna do the process, it should probably come to us first, but I don't think we should be the ones that I think we should review it and maybe have a thought, but I think it should be the total board to say yes.
Yeah,
or no.
I think a board of 7, everyone should have the right to bring it for discussion in front of the board.
I agree.
But if I had an issue with 1,000, I would consult you two first to get your thoughts on it and let you guys totally understand where I was coming at from with mine. And you could either
And we
advise me to or advise me against or clarify something for me or.
Or we could possibly work together to rewrite it, or we could,
And say, okay, let's move forward and, yeah, exactly.
and then at the end of the quarter, or whether it's every 3 months or 4 months, then it could actually, it isn't up to us to say yes or no. It's to us to say, yeah, it's been reviewed by us, and
At some point, we're in that process on the ones that folks are bringing forward that I think that all has to be shared with the superintendent at the same time, right?
yeah,
So that
I
they're-
would think he would have to be part of it.
Yeah, okay. I'm just making sure, because I don't want that to be one of those things where it's
Because I
like, oh
can't
yeah,
see
we
it.
reviewed it, we think we want to change it.
We can't have board policy in isolation of the
Right,
superintendent.
exactly.
Now, he may not agree with
But
it.
isn't our policy that superintendent bring forth policy?
Of course.
I mean, I'm just saying, I mean, isn't that's our
Of course.
policy right now? So we're talking about board members bringing forth policy.
I think yes,
Sort of.
but I think board members also have the right at any time to bring forth a recommended change to a policy.
Or at least bring it up for question.
Or
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
or
But,
question.
but Jeff, one of the things that you had said was, so if Brad has over the 1,000 and he brings it to the two of you, maybe you even look at writing up a proposed change before it comes to the board. I'm not sure that I'd go that far.
I agree with that.
Okay.
Because I think I would, the conversation, great, because you two may be able to give Brad a historical perspective of why that is, and Brad might be like, yeah, that makes sense. But if not, and he still thinks, no, I still have a reason why I want to take that further,
The whole board
then
needs
bring
to
that to the
decide.
board
Yeah.
for a board conversation of, yeah, I think we should, or no, I don't think we should.
I
And then
think
the
that makes
board
sense.
would decide at that point in time, do we go forward with looking at changing that, or do we not?
Yeah, I mean, that
makes
makes
sense.
sense.
Well, and I think another thing that's happening right now, the or cabinet, or whoever, are trying to align administrative guidelines
Yes.
with board policy. And when they do that, as they go through it, they're finding
Yes.
a little
Which is where the
little
FMLA
snippets,
came from.
you know, like
Yeah.
we did tonight, little
That's exactly
snippets
right.
that
No
don't
question.
match, right, that
Sure.
we
Like,
overlooked
wait a minute,
when
we
we
don't
were
want to take in
reviewing.
that request to the.
But I also
superintendent.
think it'll help us as board members if we're doing our research on an existing policy.
Yeah.
The intent, sometimes when you read those policies, there may be two different intents, I guess I should say. I think it's good for us to go back and read the guidelines.
Hmm.
So we understand how it's being implemented. I mean, I understand it's not our responsibility, but we could see an area that, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Let's
That
define that
actually
a
makes
little, let's
sense.
define
In
that a little
practice.
better.
You know, to make sure practice
And I think the other
matches
thing
policy.
is, I think that's a really important piece of it, is to keep in mind that it's not just about a policy about what's happening right now. It's that policy that's more that global perspective that is standing for when things may not be happening as they should. You know what I'm saying? So I think we need to be careful of, so I'll leave it right there.
No, but like you said, the one we did tonight is a perfect example.
Yes.
You go to do guidelines and you realize, oh, wait a minute, it says this and that's not practice.
But at the same time, if Jennifer would have given, let's say you and I were, then that actually could be under board business, and we could actually post that on the agenda and not
Sure.
come from the administrators,
Sure.
under board business.
Okay. Are you guys okay if I sort of write that up and just share it out with you so that we can all say maybe next?
You'll have it done by tomorrow, right?
No.
Yeah.
Chances are no.
You and I'll be here working late.
I guess so. Who's ordering pizza? Okay, but,
That's all it takes.
but, yeah, you'll order the pizza?
Foot the bill.
Ooh, he even said
We're
he'd
going
buy.
Pizza King.
Forget pizza then. All right.
I mean,
So-
I'm not speaking for everybody else, but that, I
No,
mean,
it's
at least
quick-
the process,
yeah,
at least it's a start.
As quick as I can, I will try to sort of put that, and then that way you guys can say, no, I thought I understood it to say this, and that way, at least that'll be in writing, and then if we have to make it policy or board guidelines or whatever, we have to make it so that it's, it lives on past all of us, because I do think that is an important piece.
Yeah, we might
that
end up
doesn't
putting
get
that in
us
the bylaws.
Right, that doesn't get us where we were when we started this whole thing, and that's the whole idea, is to create something ongoing so that it, we don't get there again and someone besides Dixie has to go through that all over again.
Oh, no.
Because that would, I mean, yeah, you just, we don't, and we have the
Hard.
resources to do it, as long as we break it up in manageable chunks.
Well,
Yeah,
it
I
gets
mean-
a little messier when we're all doing it.
Yeah, a little
Instead
bit.
of like when we used to have the board policy
But at the same time,
group.
as long as we have the list and we know, the issue is, there's just too much for one or two people.
It is.
That just, and that puts every board member right.
And I think that's okay.
I do too.
I think that's okay. And it, like I said, I think manageable chunks that way, which, I go with those
Do you
chunks
have
again.
the original?
I'll go, I'm sure I do. If I don't, I'll holler at you, but I'm pretty sure it's in. I don't ever delete emails. Don't, Rob, don't tell
I had
Rob.
them memorized at one point, but.
They've expanded mine like 20.
I know. Okay, so I have just closed my agenda, but I think the last thing is
Upcoming
preview of upcoming meetings.
The only preview for upcoming meeting and events, I just want to remind you all that obviously we're heading into the home stretch here and all the award programs that are coming up, where you'll be asked if you want to attend, if you can be there. I encourage you to be there as much as you can. I understand you all have other jobs and lives as well, but we appreciate your support with that.
And if you all recall, when I became the president, I told you that I may not be able to do all of these events. So if I call you and say, hey, I can't go to that one, I might need you to, I would appreciate your assistance. Because I do think someone needs to be there, as many as possible, but definitely someone, and especially if there's a role to be played on stage, and if I can't go, I'm gonna be calling you, so,
Press conference?
yes. Press conference.
Anything, guys? Okay.
All right. Bell
Bell
ringer?
ringer. I have 4 real short ones. First one tonight, I want to recognize Jennifer O'Brien. She just completed her Human Resource Specialist certificate through IASBO
Very
today.
Very
So give her a
nice.
round of applause. Thank her for doing that. Second one, Miss Tiana Washington at Hibbard was named as the 2018 Indiana State Teacher Association Teacher of the Year.
Cool.
I think it was Minority Teacher of the Year. So we want to congratulate Tiana and the great work she does there. The third one, HOSA, which is our health and occupational science group that you guys know does so well. Every senior that participated in the state conference qualified for nationals.
Wow.
Think about that.
that's amazing.
Every senior who participated in the state conference qualified for nationals.
Wow,
That's
that's
really impressive.
amazing.
Yes, that's pretty awesome.
And even more impressively, maybe not more impressively.
We have more than one senior, right?
Yes. Junior Dylan Selby was selected to be the president-elect of the Indiana HOSA chapter.
Oh, wow.
So that's
Go
really, really
Dylan. That's really awesome.
Last thing I want to leave you with, yesterday we were able to host the IASBO regional meeting here. And Karen and Rob and Chuck, I appreciate you guys carrying that on while I was out of town. But I shared with the people I was traveling with yesterday, I got an email from the superintendent of Wayne Township with a picture, a selfie in front of Civic Hall and said, "Sharp, wow." But Karen, you want to talk to us a little bit about some of the comments and feedback you heard from, I think it's about 100 that were here?
There was about 100. This was actually even bigger than just a regional meeting. This was a statewide meeting. IASBO and IAPSS, which is the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents, determined to offer free budget workshops to all schools throughout the state to go over all of the changes that are being implemented with HEA 1009 and now what is House Bill 1167. So what really they provided was absolutely essential for us. There were superintendents, there were former legislators in attendance. There was J.T. Koopman and Danica Stierson, who are the executive directors of those groups. And then a number of business office personnel, assistant superintendents, grant personnel, and software vendors who are preparing all of these changes for us in their software programs. And the State Board of Accounts and Department of Local Government Finance provided presentations to us on exactly what to expect and what that's to look like. And I cannot praise them enough for the work that they do to really be in the trenches with us. I've worked in government finance for a long time, believe it or not. I've not seen anything come together quite like this. And that is kudos to them because they really did an excellent job. I cannot say thank you enough to our custodians at Tiernan, to our staff at Civic, to our students and our staff who welcomed them, who made this happen. And I heard over and over and over, you guys should be so proud. This is a magnificent campus. It's an amazing facility. Your staff are so kind, and everything is so smooth. We don't even hear bells. So, I mean, they were really taken back that we were in the school and really could have a professional meeting with state representatives that felt like you were in a meeting center. And so I just was thrilled with how it turned out. I think that, Mr. Reynolds and I heard things all day long from everybody that attended, and that was just a really nice way to show off what we have and what we do here. So thanks to all the staff, thanks to all the students for being friendly, opening our doors, and really making everybody feel welcome.
Awesome.
Great, thank you.
That note.
Did you provide
was
police
in the
escorts to
former
town?
governor.
There's no
I should
construction
have
Oh, really?
answered all my questions.
for everybody to come through.
You are actually
Coming back, just to find out that they've closed down 2 more streets.
Exactly.
Oh, is he the attorney general?
Yeah, Karen, did you provide everybody who attended with maps, how to get here and not miss construction?